Good evening, everyone. For the record, we are convening the July 13th, 2022 special City Council meeting at 6:07. Council, when I call your name, please say here or present. Mayor Maxton?
Here.
Councilmember Cruz? Here. Councilmember Elizondo?
Here.
We're notified that Councilmember Bliss would not be in attendance tonight. Councilmember Kerner?
Here.
Councilmember Parker?
Here.
And Councilmember Menchow.
Present.
6 council members present. A quorum of City Council is declared.
Thank you, Amanda. Would everybody please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And a reminder to everybody that we are live streaming tonight's meeting. If there's anybody that would like to speak as part of the meeting, if you did, I have one of the headsets. I ask that you please do come up to the microphone and speak. It's one so that everybody that's observing the live streaming can hear the comments that are being made. If you do come up to the mic, I ask that you introduce yourself, state your name. If you're a Fair Oaks Ranch resident, please state if you're a Fair Oaks Ranch resident or not. And if you're a member from staff, just what directorate that you're from. To start off tonight, we do have citizens to be heard. I have the sign-in roster. There was nobody that signed in to speak as part of citizens to be heard. Is there anybody here tonight that didn't get an opportunity to sign up that would like to speak? Okay. Then we'll move on to the purpose of tonight's meeting, which is the special called meeting to review the FY 2023-2027, the Strategic Action Plan. And before I hand this over to Tobin and Scott, if you don't mind, I have a couple comments that I would like to make prior, just to kick this off. And first, I'd like to thank everybody for making it here to tonight's meeting. It is a special meeting, and I know we had to make some adjustments to be here tonight. I do think what we're going through tonight is important. It's an important process that we need to go through, so I appreciate you taking the time. To start off, what I'd like to say is I believe that this past year we had a successful year. We were able to accomplish some needed projects that we needed throughout the city. These included, we started the construction of the wastewater dewatering press. We had one of the largest resurfacing projects for our roads across the city, which was able to get our PCI index up to 85 across the city. We did major upgrades to our water plant number 2. We're going to utilize the Highway Safety Improvement Program to upgrade some of our roads across the city. Those that seen outside, we're doing the Chartwell realignment. Our Planning and Zoning Commission did a review of our UDC. We began live streaming all of our city council meetings. We're currently in the midst of the renovation of our city hall. We conducted a Citizens Advisory Committee for a utility rate study and also for a code of conduct. We designed 4 of our stormwater projects, and we've updated and approved capital improvement plans for transportation, water, wastewater, and stormwater. So we've accomplished a lot. And this is not a complete list. It was just a lot of the major things that I wrote down. There are many other things that could be added to the list. But how do we measure success? We completed a lot of projects, and completing tasks is good. It shows effort. We're making things happen, but how do we determine if it was success? And to me, accomplishing the right or the priority projects, which contributes towards an overall long-term goal, is really how we measure success. And even in looking at that, I would say that yes, this year we were successful. Over the past 8 years, this council, with multiple individuals serving here, has put in place the needed tools to manage the long-term goals that impact the future of Fair Oaks Ranch. We've moved from a general law city to a home rule charter city, which has allowed us to develop the needed tools. We put in place a comprehensive plan which describes the 20 to 30-year long-range planning objectives to guide our growth and development. We approved a unified development code which promotes the public health, safety, and general welfare and the quality of life of the present and future citizens of Fair Oaks Ranch. We've approved a future land use map along with zoning to manage future development and the construction within our city. We've approved the master plans for drainage, water, wastewater, and reuse systems. And last, developed and utilized a strategic action plan which provides a planning focus that covers the upcoming 5 years. From our comprehensive plan, it states that it took care and planning to design Fair Oaks Ranch as a community that would attract residents and become an enviable place to live. It will take the same level of care and effort to maintain the community's character and the exceptionalism over the next decades as new neighborhoods are built and the surrounding regions experience profound population growth. The strategic action plan, which we are here to review tonight, narrows the scope of priorities as actions needed for the midterm and the short term so that ultimately we can move forward towards the long-term goals that are laid out in our UDC and our master plans. I believe if developed with good insight to our long-range goals, the strategic action plan will provide us the needed information to make budgeting and resourcing a more straightforward process for us. Additionally, having a council-approved strategic action plan provides guidance for a way ahead to our city staff and also provides a framework to residents for desired accomplishments over the short term. Finally, at the end of the fiscal year, it provides us a means to determine if we were successful in our execution for the year. Going forward into the next year, I'm going to recommend integrating a review and update process of the strategic action plan into our council meetings throughout the year, which would finalize sometime prior to our budgeting process. But for tonight, what I would like to spend most of our time going through the pillars. I believe success tonight is having a good open discussion on each of the pillars. What does overall success in each of the pillars mean to the individuals on council? And do we have the correct priorities in place for each of the pillars? And then if needed, we can take a look at and discuss, do we have the right pillars for our long-range goals? Given all this information, I believe this will help us to finish out the budgeting process this year and will provide us the needed guidance for updating the strategic action plan going into next year. Given all that, is there any questions from council from me on the information that I provided? Really trying to provide a framework of why the strategic action plan is important and really providing a focus of what I see that we need to accomplish tonight. All right, with that, I'll hand it over to Tobin.
Excuse me. Thank you, Mayor. And council, just so you know, I'm going to wear a mask tonight since I've been traveling abroad, and I'm feeling great. No problems. Just want to be cautious for everybody in the audience. Mayor, you summed it up extremely well. I just wanted to remind the council before we turn it over to Scott, this is your strategic plan. The last time we touched this in a holistic manner like this, I believe, was 2018-19. So it's a wonderful opportunity for council to tell us and put in place your strategic initiatives. It's not a staff plan. It is y'all's plan. So please, I can't encourage you enough to discuss freely, put everything out there. Staff is mainly going to do a bunch of listening tonight other than Scott's presentation, and we look forward to seeing where you land on the strategic initiatives. Scott.
Thank you, Mayor and Council and City Manager. I'm going to keep my part short because, again, like the Mayor and Manager said, the purpose is to hear from you all on what our priorities should be and how our strategic action plan should look for the next several years. I toyed with various names for this, from Plan 2.0, 5-year plan, et cetera, I'm open to options. But so far, I figured the goal is to have, roughly a 5-year time frame. So thinking if next year's fiscal year 23, we'll start there and go if in the next 5 years, 23 through 27. Quickly, overall, for the meeting tonight, like I said, the focus will be on the pillars. I'll talk in this presentation just a little bit about what our objectives are. I do want to review what the strategic plan is, how it works, just for everyone to make sure we're accustomed to the framework, the formats of the plan. And I'll review briefly responses to some of the council questions that we had asked you in the last couple weeks to set up a framework for the discussions of the pillars. And again, like the mayor said, we primarily want to focus on the strategic plan pillars and priorities themselves. So again, the meeting objectives for tonight, I broadly put review, update, and reinforce. We want to review the plan again to ensure that everyone who's been here, past, present, and potentially future, is familiar with the framework. And ultimately, we want to reinforce, enhance the knowledge adherence to the plan. This plan ultimately, I believe the mayor alluded to it, it's kind of the bridge between our one-year items, particularly the annual budget, to our very long-term plans like our master plans, our comprehensive plan. This is that framework that provides the middle portion, and the decisions we make around that, we want to constantly conceptualize and does this fit with the strategic plan? Are these priorities? So again, reviewing and familiarizing ourselves with it is very important. Update, that's what we want to do tonight. Make sure that we have the right pillars and priorities in place. Are there any gaps? Is there anything that's missing that would better define our pillars? Do some of the priorities not make sense in the current context? Again, like the city manager said, this is a council plan. So if there are items within the priorities that don't make sense either for the pillar themselves or just maybe are too broad, that's where we need your input. And reinforce, which I guess is kind of redundant with the first word I said at the top, but ultimately we want to take this plan and, like I said, embed it in our budgets, in our consideration pages. Everything that we do, at least from a policy perspective, should link back to the plan. We all have our, at the staff level, our daily operations that we go through every day. When we're considering new initiatives, does it link back to what the council has laid out for us in this plan? And if that links to some budget priorities that we'll talk about in the next few months, that's an added bonus. But again, here we're talking about pillars and priorities. So I thought it'd be good to start with the top of the plan, which is our vision statement. And I believe this was the vision statement that was adopted at that last meeting in the 2018-19 timeframe. That strategic plan did include the vision statement. And we talked before that the textbook definition of a vision statement is one that looks forward, creates a mental image of the ideal state that the organization, in this case the city, wishes to achieve. It's typically, should be inspirational, aspirational, and should challenge ourselves, our employees, and our stakeholders. So our vision statement as adopted has been to offer the ideal place to call home in the Hill Country, guided by strong community values and responsible growth that provides residents of all ages a place to relax and to reconnect. So, Mr. Mayor, I thought it might be useful just to take a minute or two and absorb that vision statement, get some feedback. Is this something that still resonates with this council? Does it encapsulate, again, where we ultimately want to be, not just within 5 years, but over a long-term, decades-long period? And my goal is either to affirm this statement, or if there are other thoughts about our vision, this would be could be a good time to have that discussion.
And at this time, Scott, I mean, as we're looking at it, I would say in concept, in the overall image that this projects as part of our vision statement, is there anything that we want to add or that should be omitted from it? I don't think this time we really want to wordsmith it.
Right. But yeah, just anything conceptually that grabs you, either that connects with you or else something that's missing.
But I think it's also good as we're going through this that we all understand what the vision statement was, and really lays out the basic guidelines, the vision that all of our plans were built upon, which really next down to our strategic action plan that we're looking at tonight. But I think everybody's, yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. So, I mean, really, all of our pillars should line up to this vision. If our pillars don't get us to this vision, then probably evaluate it, but I think they do. But, or if there's any other pillar we need to get to that vision that maybe we haven't thought of, that would probably be also something to add.
Okay.
Okay, so obviously this is a planning meeting. There's no formal action, but I'll take this as a at least tentative affirmation that this vision statement resonates, is still certainly applicable, and represents where we want to be.
Sir.
The next layer down is our mission statement. It's a little bit more specific. The mission statement, rather than being aspirational, should describe who we are and what we do now, and ideally who it benefits as well. Our mission statement was revised, I believe, coming out of the first iteration, or one of the iterations of the branding committee, but the mission statement in its current form is to deliver exceptional public services, preserve the natural beauty of our city, protect and promote quality of life, and foster community engagement. So again, the mission statement is more about what we do now and who we serve. So with that, I'll ask the same questions and the same opportunities for, does this describe who we are and what we do on a daily, weekly, monthly basis?
And I think the same lines what Laura mentioned, that, you know, in our mission statement, this should complement everything that we do as part of our pillars, or should be complemented by the pillars.
Good. And this, as we go through all this too, I'll stress that this doesn't necessarily end tonight. So if anybody, either individually as a group, have suggestions, thoughts, either for this or for the pillars priorities as we go through it, our process is to conceptualize all ideas as best we can, bring them back to this group at a future meeting, whether it's a regular meeting or a special meeting to be determined, and ultimately give you a proposed revised plan for all of these layers. So this is not the end of the discussion, just the beginning. But I know when I looked at both of these numerous times, I thought they were both great statements. Obviously, they had been worked on before, and having seen other plans, other statements, and other states, I myself actually have no suggestions myself, so I think it's pretty solid. So with that, we'll talk a little bit about the pillars themselves. Again, the adopted strategic plan includes 5 pillars. Pillars, of course, are the overarching policy goals. They should guide and organize everything we do with respect to planning, budgeting, and performance as well. And this is the order of how they appear in the plan themselves. So it's financial integrity, responsible growth management, reliable and sustainable infrastructure, public health, safety, and welfare, and organizational excellence.
And Scott, as we're kicking this off and we get into discussion of the pillars, what I'd like to encourage from the council is open dialogue as we go through this. And I think, I don't know that there's any right or wrong answers that can be presented tonight. It's really getting information out and thought processes about where we stand. You know, I did go back and I reviewed the initial strategic action plans that were developed as part of our city, from our city council. And what was on those plans at that time is a lot different than the pillars that we're looking at today. And it was, the focus at the time was different. What I would offer is that our focus will change over time, but ought to be focused on our vision and our mission statement and the UDC and the master plans that we have in place. And so why I think it's important that we review it but also in that capture any information that council has to provide as part of this. So as part of this, I would encourage open dialogue, and let's have a discussion about what is right for financial integrity, responsible growth, and all the other pillars. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay.
So that sets up the framework for the plan itself. I do want to back up and review just a couple of items that we talked about here, was it 4 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago, in regular committee about the structure of the plan itself. That's largely the document you have before you. Again, the structure of the plan functions through from higher level policy levels all the way down to the operational program level in what we have been calling the 4 Ps, so pillars, priorities, projects, and performance measures. Sometimes we call performance measures KPIs, but we like the alliteration, so we'll go with performance measures. So again, pillars, of course, they're intended to be long-standing. They rarely change, as they are the ultimate objectives, as defined by the council. Large part of the reason we're here tonight. And priorities are intended to be medium-term strategies, typically 2 to 5 years in length. That can vary somewhat, but they are intended to define the progress in each of the pillars. And again, that's largely the level that we want to focus on tonight. I like to think of, and from other iterations as well, the top 2 labels as the strategic plan, the policy level. That's where the council resides. That's the guidance you provide. And projects and performance measures provide the tactical plan based on the outline, the pillars, the priorities that the council defines for us. It's the staff's job to go back, take those plans or revised priorities, pillars, recommend projects that ultimately support the guidance, the strategic plan that the council adopts and updates. So projects are generally short-term tactics. We've included the full plan in your packet for reference. You'll see as we go through that we've made considerable progress on those projects we talked about last time. So a lot of this will get reshaped through the guidance and the discussion that you have here tonight. But the idea is to break this down into segments so we can track, and ultimately, I think, like the mayor was saying, track our performance in each of these categories as we go through based on the new guidance. But tonight, we want to focus again on the strategic plan area, the pillars and the priorities. And I want to review quickly again our circle of life. The purpose of this illustration is to show how planning influences all of our processes, and including our annual budget process, which we are embarking on basically as we speak. We're at the beginning of the budget process, of course, and we're doing this concurrently with this process here tonight, which will be ongoing. Ultimately, the plan is for, again, the council to adopt the policy, the pillars and priorities at that level, affirm, revise on at least an annual basis as designed in advance of our budget process and other processes going forward. After those pillars and priorities are revised, again, we propose updates, we provide status reports, propose either new projects or different projects as the case may be, and that's what we use for our trends analysis, which when we get this really refined, we should be done on at least a quarterly basis. We provide financial quarterly reports right now. We've started doing quarterly operational reports that will extend to the strategic plan as well, so we can track at the priority project and performance measure level how we are doing in advance with ultimately achieving our goals in the pillars and priorities. So on this chart, we have trends analysis 3 times, including the annual, and then we have the annual report, or including the annual report at the end. It doesn't necessarily have to be exactly quarterly, but as designed, I think that's where we would go. And one of the remaining to-do items that we spoke about last time is the development of a long-term financial plan, which is one of the priorities that we'll talk about here in just a second under financial integrity. But when we get to that point, starting presumably with the next budget cycle and before this process begins, what we do with the strategic plan and ultimately growing all those projects will heavily influence the long-term financial plan, because a lot of these processes will need some sort of resource behind it. So the idea is, starting with a strategic plan, that creates a holistic process that influences every other thing we do. Again, at the 1-year snapshot, which is the annual budget, as well as the 5-year plan, linking back to our long-term goals. I think we have most of the building blocks in place already. As the mayor said, we've made considerable progress towards achieving many of our priorities and projects already. But I think this is the first next step in creating a holistic process that links all of these pieces that we largely have in place already together into one feedback loop. So coming into this meeting, we asked the council, just a few questions around the types of processes that and services that the city offers or should offer, what we're doing well, what we could perhaps do without, and what were the top services and programs as defined by the council. I won't go through the holistic list here, but I wanted to provide just a summary of the responses and themes that I noticed from the council responses in written dialogue as well as conversation. As far as who we are, how do we get here, we're generally described by you all as a bedroom community that's growing. We're dealing with challenges and opportunities that come from growth, to be sure. But there's general agreement that we worked to build the tools and plans to respond, such as the comprehensive plan. We have capital improvements plans in place. We have master plans in place, and we have made great inroads through policies and procedure updates, a reserve fund policy, and a sustainable reserve to build financial security ongoing as well. I think that some feel like we've probably spent a lot of time catching up over the years, as we started as essentially a basic service community in maintenance mode, and now we need to respond to that growth and infrastructure challenges that come with a growing and maturing community. As far as the top goals, top programs and services go, infrastructure, public safety, and growth management, we're certainly almost uniform as really the top 3 areas that were noted as the top priorities or programs. Again, the fact that we are moving projects or turning dirt, as we sometimes say, represents considerable progress. Potential needs for expansion or emphasis included more community engagement and communication. There's some discussion on neighborhood services, included a civic center potentially as well. That came out in a couple dialogues. And as far as reductions in services, there was nothing that was specifically known by the council that we should not be doing. So one of the challenges tonight is, with all of the services and programs that we provide, again, where do we most want to emphasize? So that will kick off shortly, Mr. Mayor, probably our discussion as we get into the pillars and priorities themselves. But I wanted to pause there. I should probably get close to the microphone one more time to kick it back to you, Mayor, and the council, if there are any reactions either to this, questions about the plan structure hierarchy itself, but I think this is a good place to start.
Just want to make sure I understand the process. At some point, we're going to be talking about each one of the pillars one at a time, or did we miss that and we should have talked about it already? I'm trying to understand if we're still in an overview briefing or if we're actually in the discussion portion.
We're going to talk about the pillars.
Okay, so we're just in the overview briefing
Yes.
portion.
Pillars are coming up next week. I'm sorry.
Okay.
What I was trying to do is kind of set the stage for the overriding goals, responses, and then we'll talk about each of the pillars individually and hopefully have a really good discussion.
Awesome.
When we talk about these pillars individually, and I'm just going to pick on one of these that we have written up here that was important: growth management and planning, preserving the neighborhood integrity in the Hill Country feel. That's a great statement, I would say, but I would gander that many of us would have different definitions to what exactly those things are. So is that what we're going through tonight, to say, okay, for me, growth management is X, for you, growth management is this. So as a council, what what do we want our strategy to be as a whole?
It's exactly what we would like to do. Yes, ma'am.
Perfect.
Anybody else?
I think that's the end of my overview section, as it were. Make sure I'm on the right place. And, well, I guess one more, as we get into priorities, these are some of the questions I thought that I asked myself as we were going, as I reviewed our priorities and pillars, and I think a lot of the discussion will revolve around these questions, and many others as we talk through them, but just as we go through, again, we go through each of the 5 pillars as proposed. Is there anything missing? Do the priorities that are there now make sense to you, just conceptually even? Are they specific? Do they really mean anything? And we can also get into just at least high level, how do we measure success? How do we know we are achieving financial integrity, responsible growth management, et cetera? So I just wanted to set that stage as well. But with that, I think we're ready to jump into the pillars themselves.
Yeah, I think that's what we have for the rest of the evening.
Yes, sir. So,
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so I have a comment on financial integrity. So we've had this one for the beginning, and we're making really good progress on the priorities below it, though I see many of them are coming to a close. And so, at least in the next year or so, so that makes me wonder what's next, what's missing within this pillar? Because, you know, there's more on the financial side than just integrity. That's obviously key. We needed to get that level, and all those projects we did got there. There's one part of quality of life for Fair Oaks Ranch for me, and making it an ideal place to live that I think most people agree with me that we have more of a fiscal conservative, fiscal moderation type of an atmosphere where we want to keep taxes as low as possible. I feel like that should be part of this pillar somehow, because that is a philosophy that a lot of us have. Whenever we go to vote on something, how much is it going to affect our taxes? And keeping taxes at a reasonable level that makes people want to live here is, I feel, belongs in this pillar and will allow us to kind of continue going forward past integrity. Whether we use the term financial integrity and moderation or conservatism, it's kind of a loaded term, maybe we don't want to put that in there, or efficiency, whatever we want to put in there, but I want to put something in this pillar that has something to do with low tax rates.
I guess if I could respond. So when I look at this and trying to keep it at the 40,000 foot level, which is where it's supposed to be, when we put the verbiage in there, sustainable financing strategies, that's the stuff that, you know, to me, we need to emphasize getting to a level of maturity. And I think part of the technologies that we need in place is the long range forecast, because that's where we build the ability to see, you know, how we're going to provide the service levels that the citizens want at an affordable price, because we're going to see here's where it's smart to do debt financing. Here's where we just have to understand that, you know, if we've made a decision that we're going to be a bedroom community, what the impacts on our tax rates are going to be from that being our primary source of revenue. And so I sense that the answer to your question is in being able to have that insight by having long-range financial forecasts where we can integrate, you know, our service levels, our capital outlays with our revenue streams and see where those impacts are. Because I see it as being, you know, the idea of being frugal is not in not spending money, it's spending money wisely. And to do that, you need information. And that's the gap that I think we need to work on.
And do you want to just continue? So actually, I think that's what we have been focusing on, and that's what all of our projects have been on. It has been, how do we make sure we're bringing in the right amount of revenue to cover our services? That is, financial integrity, and that's maintaining that revenue stream. Goes hand in hand with that. Yes, we want to do that, but let's do that in a way that can lower tax rates. And so one of the options that I have under this pillar would be a new priority, which would be look for additional funding and grant opportunities, which may include creating a grant program or a grant officer, someone who can manage and look for grants, other ways to find funding other than raising property taxes. I think that's one area of our city we don't have. I mean, we just started going after grants. Do we have somebody that's going to be able to constantly maintain all of the communication that we have to do with these grants? Or is it spread out amongst lots of different leaders? So I think that might be an area that will help with that. And I just kind of want to have that overall philosophy put in here somewhere, that it's not just about how do we fund things. It's about how do we fund things and not impact the residents as much as we, at the minimal amount that we can. So that's kind of what I was thinking about putting in there. That's my thoughts.
That's good. The we have down here the develop a 5-year forecast as part of financial integrity. And for me, it kind of ties into what you're both saying, that I'm not sure that we've gotten to it yet, but a 5-year financial forecast. I believe what I heard from Roy is that as changes or additions that we're making to our operations and maintenance budget each year, especially additions, if we add an individual to our city staff, we incur that expense for the next 4 or 5 years. And so that impacts our budget, not just in the year that we make the decision, but it impacts our budget for the 5 years out. And so having that view of where we can see our budget and the impacts that we're making today and when it has the impact on the budget 5 years from now, I think would be helpful for me in determining those long-range impacts that we're making, but also as we're looking at it and how we do be fiscally conservative, and then also identifying it as, and I think it's a great area that you brought up, additional funding. So as we identify those areas, how can we find, as we're looking at a 5-year forecast, we know what that forecast is. We ought to be able to take that and determine, are there areas that we can go out for grant funding or additional funding to support us in those, instead of turning to the tax rate every time.
So I don't know where we want to end up tonight, but did we want to look at how we would change the name of this pillar, or maybe the description where it says priority areas and projects, or is that too deep? I'm trying to.
I agree with you. I think that we need to take the word integrity out of there because it kind of throws a different spin on, I think, what we're trying to say, and some way to better define what we're trying to do with the finances. I think the out-of-the-box funding idea is an outstanding way for us to go ahead and capitalize on things that we need to do, and that doesn't fall in with the word integrity. I'd like to see a little more description in there.
You have an idea of what word you would want?
Responsibility.
Because if I had one, I'd give it.
Yeah.
I'd say responsibility.
Responsibility. See, I like the word integrity. I do like that. I just thought maybe we could add to it, like integrity and moderation, or.
Well, integrity kind of goes with it, though, right? I think.
So the genesis of the word integrity is this kind of a standard from my perspective on the end, because it talks about all of that. And I see the thing, well, how can we, because part of financial integrity is responsible management. It's a component. What I did when the suggestion was, let's look for alternate revenue streams as one of our priorities. I mean, I would add that, and I jotted down grant management, but I think that's even too specific. I think we need to look at how can we be creative in figuring out how to fund the service levels. To me, it all boils down to, we're just trying to do what the citizens want. If we want to maintain a beautiful hill country style city, we have to find a way to pay for that. But we don't have to be locked into, two sources, sales tax or whatever sources, sales tax and fees and property tax, necessarily. But we need to understand that. And so we need to see, what those costs are long range and plan ahead. Going for a grant is not something you can do 5 minutes before you need the dollars. So it has to be part of your strategy. I think, using our credit capacity wisely is part of that. It's a way of smoothing those impacts when we have, a big spend.
So when we use the word a lot, and that just, in what you were saying, Roy, I heard the word strategy used probably 3 or 4 times. Why don't we move that word strategy up to the 40,000 foot level, as you said, and use that? Financial strategies is part of our responsibility for planning, right, at the top. So we might want to include the word strategies in what we're calling this, financial strategies in what we're calling this pillar, because we're planning for the future. We're planning the roadmap on how to get there and how to maintain it sustainably. It's a strategy that we're working on at the 5-year level plus. An idea.
Maybe we can kind of make it similar to the second pillar, where we have responsible growth management, maybe responsible financial management, or responsible financial strategy.
Right?
Right,
Here
but
comes back to-
It's all strategies.
I'll throw one more out there
Okay.
that, and not to wordsmith this too much, but the word that I hear in our government finance circles a lot is resilience. The notion being that it's incorporating planning for the future, being resilient and able to absorb potential shocks or unknowns. So that encapsulates having proper reserves levels, having a structurally balanced budget, revenues exceeding expenditures on an ongoing basis, having capital improvement plans in place with funding mechanisms. So it's a broad, I don't want to say generic, but a broad-faced term that incorporates all that. There's obviously strategic elements to that. I just thought I'd throw that out there.
So again, to me, and we use that word sustainable. So coming from an infrastructure intensive place, we talked about resiliency and sustainability a lot as 2 separate ideas. The resiliency is your ability to respond effectively to, if you will, risks that become reality. And the sustainability is to be able to do that over and over again. And again, I'm not trying to, to me, the label isn't as important as the ideas that are under it, but integrity covers all that. With financial integrity, if you think about it in terms of your own personal finances, that I have the wherewithal to do all the things that I'm responsible for in a manner that doesn't create problems. and that's so maintaining financial integrity means I've got to be sure I have the reserves to deal with issues that come up. I've got to be sure that if I've made commitments to the community, that I have the dollars to cover those commitments. And it's all the little things you have to do strategically and tactically to make that happen. And so that's why the label works for me, but maybe it's because of my background. It talks to me about all those things that everybody's saying. But again, I'm not going to get hung up on the label of that pillar. Just what we're doing in that pillar is what's important to me.
And I think that's the part that, we're not disagreeing that that's important, but you're just focusing on how does the city make enough money to cover the services, and that's only half of the story. The other story is how does that impact financially the residents of the city, because that is the driver of quality of life here. and that part is missing in here, we need to add that. Because we all take that into account in our voting, but it's not in our strategy and vision. And it should be, because I think people here want to see that we intend to still focus on keeping as low a tax rate as we can, or, you know, having as minimal impact financially on the residents. We should state that, because we all do that. And part of that would be looking for other ways to bring in funding that doesn't impact the residents. Because we could do everything you said, Roy, by raising taxes. And still be resilient and still be everything, but I want that focus in there that says we as a council are concerned about the financial impact of our residents and looking for ways to
Strategize?
to come up with ideas. Like, so when we have to do fund
So what if-
something,
what if
the
we-
number one answer isn't raise taxes. It might be, hey, what grant is out there? What is this? And we already do that. Let's put it in here.
So how do you feel about the word accountability? If we said financial integrity and accountability, assuming that that's what we're accountable to the citizens for is we don't ask for money we don't truly need to do what they've asked.
I think we're talking around the word moderation. I'm,
Well,
Are we looking
well-
for revenue
I mean, I don't know why you don't want to
diversification?
just say it.
Well, so if we want to say, I mean, because you could use a word like affordable. I just think when we're doing this, you know, there's going to be other people sitting in these seats, and so, you know, I'm just trying to think about, you know, our duty. If I put the word affordable in there, that's going to mean so many different things to so many different people. Regardless of what you do with the tax rate, it's going to have a lot of different impacts to a lot of different people. So, you know, I'll go with whatever, because, you know, to me, we have to make sure that the city can continue to function, and that's the essential piece. You know, with 9% inflation, I don't know, you know, how we always resolve it to the point where the citizens are always going to think that in their mind it's affordable, that the taxes are affordable. That's my concern.
So,
Yeah,
Go ahead.
you're in.
okay. Sorry, I was waiting to see. So I tend to agree with Laura on this one, that I think it's an important piece of the financial structure. For me, the word that's up there honestly doesn't make an enormous difference, because I think it should be there. And whatever word you want to put up there that defines that, I agree with. I think the issue that I'm running into with all of this is when we're talking about actually, whatever we want to call it, aside from sustainability, but the needs versus the wants. We're talking about city services. I don't think necessarily that we all agree on what city services it is, you know, that are important, if that makes sense. The needs versus the wants. I think my needs might be different than other people's and wants, and vice versa. So I think wordsmithing this document is good, but I think we need to get into the nuts and the bolts of the plan moving forward, the actual how we want to do this.
And I think that's what the priority areas are. And so, and I do think this pillar was financial integrity. We didn't have up-to-date systems. We didn't have budgets. We didn't budgets that meet the GFOA standard, all that stuff. Like, all this amazing stuff we have now is because our staff did all these projects. We didn't have all that, and now we do. Remember, internal controls was a big deal. I remember that when we were first in here. I think but I'm seeing projects that are coming to an end, and I don't want this pillar to come to an end. I want these priorities to continue and look to the future beyond just, okay, now that we have good financial processes and integrity and we have plans, what's next? You know, that's what I'm looking at. Because I'm looking at, like, there's not many color boxes to the right of 2023. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I think
There's
based
a lot of
on,
blue.
I'm sorry, based on, you know, the feedback you're giving, we can certainly come up with more boxes. I mean, what I'm hearing right now is, you know, a focus on, in some way, shape, or form, and I won't I won't the word itself too much, but some level of financial, I guess, fiscal responsibility, restraint,
Yeah,
accountability.
restraint, that's a great word.
All those types of things. And within that, I've heard a couple of potential priorities in terms of explore grant or external funding opportunities. I heard, maybe as the manager summarizing, someone saying revenue, study potential revenue diversification, other tax or non-tax revenues on an ongoing basis. When you think about, so there's a couple right there that I think would have at least 3 or 4 projects right there just under those priorities. When you think about trying to constrain or at least limit the amount of growth I'm hearing is probably burden to the taxpayers, are there other areas that you would think of as priorities that would revolve around trying to
Go ahead.
provide that limitation?
So listening to the others, another thing that I thought that if we're going to evolve, how we accomplish this goal, and for right now, the word I want to spit out is cost control. And just as an example, we've talked about when we start getting into, and I think Chesley raised a good point, the needs versus the wants. And one of the ways that we were supposed to be evolving to do that is to say, if it's not in the plan, you're going to have to come up with a really compelling argument to find budget dollars to allocate to it. That's a form of cost control that does that matching between, but then there's a lot of, things at the lower levels, we're making sure we're making the best deals when we do go out and seek to do projects or, fund programs and things like that. So, and I'm thinking more of those are things that are articulated at the priority level. I certainly have no problem putting verbiage in this pillar that makes sure that those concepts are communicated. For the future councils to say, wait a minute, we were supposed to be looking at, fiscal controls to control spend.
As I was reading this and looking at it, one of the things that stood out to me, it's really come out as part of the conversation, is when I believe this was initially put together, we were really focused on the transparency of our financial systems and how do we show what it is that we're doing as a city and be transparent with our residents, how we're using revenue funds. My belief is, through the great work through our finance department, they've really accomplished a lot of that, even to this year with the popular finance report that we put out that shows, in a simpler terms, what we're doing as a council, a city staff with the revenue and the tax dollars that we have. But I believe that, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, that was the focus. And over time, with what we've developed, the systems that have been put in place, some of that has been resolved. And so instead of, we've moved from more of a integrity transparency into a financial management process now. So we have the capabilities to see what we're doing. We have the capabilities now to project our 5-year forecast. Now, how do we take that and use that to develop financial models to do the things that we've mentioned here, keep our tax rate low, find other funding opportunities so that we can utilize to operate and maintain the city as needed. Does that?
Mm-hmm.
I think we're almost in violent
It's
agreement.
a good point. I mean, this is, as we've gone through it now, it's probably an area that has developed over time.
We did a great job of getting financial integrity. Now, let's continue.
What do you think? We provided enough comments?
I think absolutely. I'll throw one more wrinkle into it just because it's a different heading, I think, just because that's a question I had when I was reading this as we think about this budget process. And the next is, where does from a council perspective, long-term financing of long-term projects fit into the financial restraint, and that bleeds into other areas, really all of the pillars, but at its core, it's finding ways to at least fund the priorities, right, or the identified projects, and as a priority, where does the council see not just identifying long-term strategies, but how those should look? It's an open question, but it's one I had.
But take a stab. So the way I see it is we have our reserves, and for the things, for like the repair and replacement things, we should kind of target where those are at least substantially covered for, with those reserves. I'm saying we have to replace pumps and things like that, vehicles and those kind of things. If we have to add a major piece of infrastructure, the ones on the table, things like water storage capacity or wastewater treatment capacity, the thing that we want to look at is develop, by having some forecasting ability, policies to say this is the kind of thing that would trigger using debt financing for. And the purpose is to basically smooth that impact on our citizens of having those outlays, whether they be, utility customers, or we did that for the road work too. You just can't okay, we're gonna raise the tax rate so we can pay for $8 million in 1 year. You spread it. And we just have to have kind of like those institutional understanding of what are the kind of triggers that cause us to use one financing mechanism versus the other. And what I hear my peers saying is we want to look at ways, we want to be able to develop ways of doing that where we're not having shocks on our tax rate to be able to do that.
Other thoughts on long-term financing, or do we need long-term financing even?
I think we do, because I think you're right. Historically, the city has been build a reserve fund, spend the reserve fund, build a reserve fund, spend a reserve fund. And we're constantly trying to fill it back up again instead of, maybe we should just do a long-term debt strategy for that, which makes sense, right? I saw the little graph thing that you showed the other day. I think it suited the city well when it first was back then, but I think there's so many more things available to the city at this stage.
It's just real frequent. That's why a lot of infrastructure intensive places use it to smooth.
I think we have a lot of things that are going to be coming up in the future that are going to cost more money than we are going to be able to reasonably cover with taxes, and it's something that we're going to have to consider.
I think as we look at it, obviously it'll have to be considered, on the case-by-case basis. And Chesley mentioned earlier, when we talk about looking at our projects, it's a resourcing methodology. We have to fund it, we have to man it, and we have to equip it to make it be successful. And then how do we do that? And some of these, I agree, are going to be beyond the capabilities of what we can provide with our current revenue that is generated at the city. So yes, at some point I think we are going to have to look at some type of long-term debt. But it's really through this process of strategic action planning and the other measures, the tools that we have in our kit bag, and determining what are the priority projects that we want to apply long-term debt to. And so that we're making the right decisions that contribute to the long term of our city, achieve those long-term goals. That we're not wasting, I don't know that it would be wasting, but it prioritizing, I think, is probably a better word when we're looking at long-term debt. Prioritizing those projects that are needed as part of it.
I think just to kind of go off of that a little bit, I mean, I think we're talking about that with especially things happening, the future development that we have coming in. How can we work with other entities and, you know, developers that are coming in that want to put stuff in to help put in that infrastructure? I think that kind of goes a little bit along with what Laura was saying, is how can we, you know, get other funding, not just grant funding, but, you know, looking at all options for the funding of the infrastructure that we know that we ultimately need. So taking our 5-year plan and saying we're going to have so many connections and we need this plant and that, and then how can we bring other people in to share that cost?
Definitely multifaceted, you know, of anytime we look at debt, and as projects arise, we're going to have to just make that decision if it's something that we're going to be able to finance out long-term. I just see it as one of those things that as we plan for it, we'll be able to use it as a tool to go ahead and keep our tax rates where they're supposed to be. So it's not necessarily, because it's long-term doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad plan.
Right.
And that's what a lot of people need to be able to, we need to be able to communicate that well to everybody as we look at the fact that we're going to be spending money that technically we don't have, that we're going to be financing out, just like any family does.
I agree with you completely, because, you know, sometimes the term debt is a negative connotation. Oh, we're going to go put the city in debt. But at the same time, no one would recommend you just buy a house on cash. You know, you would always you use a mortgage, and that's debt, right? And because financially that makes most sense for people. So I think we could make that argument, and I think it's a strategy we should probably put in there. It could fall under additional funding or whatever we want to, category we want to put it under.
That helps me.
All right. Any other comments on this pillar? I think it was a good discussion, and I appreciate everybody opting up and finding comments.
Yeah, I just one little point here, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on it because it may only mean something to my mind. But we have in the past we did, and it's been mentioned, we had a need to focus on the internal control dimension, and I see some verbiage in here that starts to talk about risk. You know, risk to me, management being a higher level idea that, you know, internal controls are one of the means you use to manage risk. And I think that's another area where there's some opportunity to us to evolve and mature and start to look at it more from the governance risk management perspective, knowing that our internal controls are the part of what supports that. I'm real happy to see that there's some representations in here that we want to start, because as we go through the projects and programs that are supporting these strategies, you know, sometimes we can't get everything done as fast as we want, or we have to make a decision to stop something, and we just need to understand, you know, how are we going to mitigate or transfer the risks associated with those decisions about what we're able to do and what we're not able to do. And so I think that's something worth, it's in here, you know, to a level I'm satisfied with, but just something to think about as we start to say, well, what's the next, you know, level of maturity we can get to on our quote unquote internal control framework thoughts.
I agree with what Roy's saying, that we've done a lot of work in our audit procedures and our internal control procedures to ensure that we have outside agencies coming in to look at our framework and make sure that we're doing the right things audit-wise. And we've even had a couple of internal control framework looks, and to make sure that as our operations and how we handle funding across the city, that we're doing the right things and not providing those opportunities for misuse or neglect in our city's operations. I think that's important. So yes, I would agree with Roy. It's something that we ought to keep and include as part of our process.
Okay.
And we're ready for
Oh, my. There we go.
Yay. That only took us an hour.
This could be a big one. So what does responsible growth management mean? And I'll just kick it off. I think there's two areas to me that this could focus on. One is we talk about the characteristics, the semi-rural appeal of Fair Oaks Ranch, and then managing future growth across the city to ensure that we maintain that characteristic. I think that's part of our vision and our mission statements, some relation. The other piece that responsible growth management, I think, relates to our city services, how we manage the growth of the city and still provide those city services, whether that be safety, water, wastewater, road networks, or stormwater, and that we're able to provide those services to current residents and future residents that will be part of the city in these new developing areas. Those are broad statements in general, but maybe provides a framework for others to provide comments on what they...
Yeah.
I think it's a good area and a good area for us to really get comments out on where we stand individually as individual council members on what we think responsible growth management is.
I think the one dimension I would add to what you said, Greg, which I think is good, is that we need to maintain our readiness to work effectively with development projects that come to our city. And you know, it's all in here. I'm not asking to add anything. I'm just saying it needs to be a continuing focus to support the processes that we put in place so that we have that readiness and I'm going to use the word respond. Ideally, we could find some way to be proactive. It's difficult, I realize, to be able to deal effectively with the development that's going on within our city and on the perimeter of our city, if possible.
Go ahead.
There's a couple things in the wording and the description of responsible growth management that I really like, that I don't see any priority areas regarding, and that's in the second sentence. The city and its leadership need to be active participants in addressing regional issues and planning efforts. The only way we're active participants is if we actually are actively participating with our regional organizations. I don't see us on the AAMPO. I don't see us at the Greater Bear County Council of Cities. I don't see us working with ACOG. Now, we might be, and I'm just not aware of it, but I'm not certainly getting any reports that we are. I think we need to start focusing on growing those regional relationships, ensuring we have city council representation at those meetings. People know who we are, not just in Kendall County, but in Comal County, in Bear County, in all these areas, because they're the ones talking with TxDOT and expanding roads, and they're the ones, you know, approving Lemon Creek. Those are the people we need to grow those relationships with, and if we have an active plan of, okay, Laura, you cover this. Okay, Roy, you cover this. Greg, he has these, you know, those. I don't know if we have that plan, but I do think it should be a project where we're managing that, not just letting it happen. And I think that is going to be a long-term key to being able to do responsible growth, because right now we're reactive. And we're not in the conversations, because by the time we hear about it, or you hear about it on the news, we're past the point of making any changes. It's pretty much happening.
I absolutely endorse that comment.
How do we hear about it? I mean,
We
new guy
hear about it
question.
because somebody writes a newspaper article, or they present it to a planning committee at San Antonio, and we find out because they call us, you know? Sometimes they talk to us in advance, right? But, and I know the staff has an objective to kind of do this as well at their level, and they're doing a great job and joining all the municipality organizations. We're not putting that in here, because I think that's a key thing too, to maintain that.
No, I agree with you, and it's a big part of revenue diversification. You know, going out and finding those funds with these organizations that are available for us to compete for.
Right. I think maybe we could use that and replace a 2.5. I don't know if we need to keep 2.5 in there, because I don't know if we have any more. Do we have any more environmental sustainability programs that we're doing? Could that roll under an infrastructure master plan area? Do we want to get rid of 2.5 altogether and put a new one, like replace 2.5 with this interlocal relationship thing?
I don't know if it fits in there. The reason I hate to lose 2.5 altogether is because I'm worried about our groundwater, but.
Well, then maybe we need to add a project, but there's no more projects under 2.5,
Or come up with a
right?
category that covers that, but I think you're absolutely right, Laura, and it's a thing that you can only work proactively. You cannot wait until you heard about the project. You have to go develop these relationships in advance so that you're hearing about them while they're just a twinkle in somebody's eye, so to speak.
Have it out with this little napkin.
Scott, you asked about how do we find out? And I don't know when we found out about the Lemon Creek Ranch, but my belief is when we found out, it was already months
deal.
from starting construction.
We were hearing
There was
about
a
it
plan
here.
already approved on how it was going to be constructed. So I agree with what Laura and Roy are saying. I mean, we want to get ahead of that. And so by partnering with our regional entities, integrating with them. Another key one is the several apartment complexes that are going in just outside the city limits along
Right.
Eats Elkhorn on the other side of Elkhorn Ridge. In some of those, we have found out about them. They're in I guess when we found out, well, one of them we found out was already approved for development. Some of the others are in the final stages of development. And all of those are going to have access to their apartment complexes off of Dietz Elkhorn. And Dietz Elkhorn is a city road. It's one of our Fair Oaks Ranch road, although it's accessing property that's outside the city. And I believe that traffic analysis surveys were done for each of those projects, but the results were not provided to us. And so the impact is on the city of Fair Oaks Ranch from traffic analysis, not onto the entities that they were submitted to. And so I agree, by incorporating with partners that are around us, developing those relationships so that we're on the front end and gathering this information as it comes up. And also in a position to make some impact on how it's going to, those developments, what they're going to impact on our city, and have some input to that.
I guess my question was geared more towards, is there an organization that, or a list of organizations that we should be concentrating on that would get we'd get the most bang for our buck to spend time with? And how do we find out about that? Or is that?
I think we
is
have
that
a list.
there?
I think we have a list.
We do have a list.
And it's probably something we should review and make sure that, Laura mentioned all the counties, definitely
Sure.
integrating within the Alamo area,
NPO.
Yeah,
MPO.
AAMPO, yeah, that's a long one.
It's probably another organization, but there are probably others out there that we ought to sit down and make sure. And I like the idea of maybe splitting it up and assigning council member responsibilities, and maybe even with the staff member.
It's not
along with
dissimilar to what we do, as we assign a liaison to work with
Committees.
the ISD, and that's a lot closer to home, but it's just like, And, you know, some of it, Scott, to answer your question, my impression is it's not going to be like showing up for meetings of an organization. Sometimes it's going to have to be just kind of going and trying to create and nurture personal relationships with some of our peers. You know, I know the city staff has been trying to work and had my own little interactions with them. They're a challenge. The San Antonio Planning Organization, for example. And that stuff's kind of tough because people are kind of tend to be territorial. But I think we just have to get out there and mingle with our peers in our neighboring cities and counties and stuff. And it's not as easy as it sounds. For one thing, it's a lot of allocation of personal time to go out there and develop those relationships. And then those people come and go, too, just like us. So it's a lot of work. But I think it's something we ought to at least make an effort to do. You know, just if we had railroad tracks, we could put our ear down on the railroad tracks and try to listen that way. But it's just a listening post, so we can decide is there something more formal that we need to do. Because it's going to be happening faster and faster and faster, as near as I can tell, from all the growth, all the people that want to live in the hill country all of a sudden. So
I think we all got that email from somewhere. I don't know where it just said, hey, the TML, meeting is happening in September. If you want to go, let me know. Well, no, we should be active. We say, we need to have a city rep who wants to be there. Let's make sure it's in the budget. Let's try to be more proactive about it, just saying, hey, we should be there. Who's going to be there?
This one's easy. It's in San
right?
Antonio.
It's in San Antonio, but they have lots of other meetings like that a lot of times it's given to us as an option. And sure, do I want to take a day off of work? I don't know, but if we make it as a priority, and we rotate or whatever, then I think we can make sure that we all get there. And if somebody's going, I don't know, right? And if they go, I don't know that they went or what happened there, because we don't give reports to each other like that.
Well, we're kind of getting a little off topic, but I think that would be a good idea for us to start giving reports on things we can do.
We got it. We'll bring a list of the organizations and help y'all understand which ones may or may not add value, more of an external focus versus an internal focus. To answer your question on some of the development stuff, it's really going to be dependent on what you want to do. As an example, other jurisdictions, if Lemon Creek, let's use that as a development or an example y'all brought up. The only way to find out about things like that is to have a mechanism to track agendas, because cities and counties have certain laws when they notify people, when they don't, and we can't make someone overextend and notify when they don't have to. So it's really just tracking the situation. But Alamo Area Council of Governments, TML, all those things that could really add value, we'll bring that list forward. That's kind of easy to assemble for you. We can even start breaking it down to policy level versus operational level, and y'all can decide how you want to cover it.
So to chime in here, we've been talking a lot about the responsible growth management of everything around Fair Oaks. But we haven't really talked about in Fair Oaks.
That's true.
Where do we stand on that? I think,
Thank you for
we've
bringing it up.
put things in place, obviously, with planning and zoning and all of that, to help control what's left of our ETJ and how that gets developed. But, where are our ideas as far as what's coming? We've got another commercial build out over here by Fishers, coming. Is there going to be more of that with Bernie Ranch Estates or whatever we're calling it these days? How is that going to look? And what are our visions? We've seen the presentations from the past meeting on what their visions were. What are our visions for how we want that? I personally don't like it. I want big lots with big houses and, maybe a little Parker's type strip on Ralph Fair. And that's what I like.
I'll chime in with you on this one. I think that something that I see is that Ralph Fair is going to become a large thoroughfare. I mean, we don't want it to. We want it to be a pretty boulevard. I get that. Don't know how much say we're going to have in that, but that is going to happen. So when I think of looking up at the north side of what we have left to develop, you know, I know it's rural residential. It's a hard one to say. And I know that means large lots, and I agree. I mean, I live on a large lot. I want large lots. But I don't, there's two other things that I think about when I see these things, and asking somebody to live on a 5 acre or 3.5 acre with, you know, some, if they give parks right up against a major thoroughfare, I don't know that that's going to be feasible. So would we be able as a council, or how does everybody feel as a council about adding things, small commercial, to get more taxes to help with our base? And when I say small, I'm thinking more Parker's ice creams, things like that. You know, I'm not opposed to that. I will say that now. But I have no idea how the rest of the council feels, because it's, you know, talking about other ways that we can come up with a tax base, and I think that that could be a possibility.
I think I'm hearing both Emily and Chesley talk about our future land use map and our zoning map and our comprehensive plan, all of which we created. But what I don't see in under 22.2 is the regular cycle of when we plan to review that as a council, because what we created back then was great for back then, and you know, maybe we need to have a regular cycle where we sit down and we say, is this really what our future land use map should be? You know, because that's where we're going to talk about what you're talking about and what you're talking about. That is our tool. We created it. I don't see on here the regular cycle, and maybe there is, it's just not on here, of when we're updating the comprehensive plan in UDC from the perspective of growth management. Like, for instance, do we do that every 2 years? Do we do that every 3 years? Do we do that every 5 years? I don't know what the answer is. But council terms are 2 years or 3 years, so it's possible we can have an entire council term and have them never even look at the comprehensive plan, right? Or charter says every 2 years, so we should probably have that in that line for 2.25, just every 2 years, showing that we're reviewing that, and potentially the same as the CIPs, and having those in there programmed so we know exactly what year we're looking at them.
Yeah, something that somebody said, and it triggered my thought. Maybe it was, you know, I think it's worth looking at, and we need to look at some of our philosophies. And I didn't wear my, you know, armor today, so, but feel free to throw things at me. But one of the things we really need to look at is our philosophy about, you know, how to build out these large tracts and what makes sense. You know, there's stuff out there that says here's the right way to build in the hill country that isn't necessarily aligned with what we've got in our comprehensive plan. And it talks about, you know, rather than the large lots clustering and retaining green space as part of that development plan, the other consideration out there is when, if we're going to do the CCNs on that stuff, spreading the houses out that far, we're building the most expensive, hard to run utility you can imagine. And if we're talking about how can I do the right thing by our taxpayers and our ratepayers, you know, that might not necessarily be it. I'm not predicting the decision that the council in place at the time would make. I'm just saying that that's something that periodically needs to be looked at, because the vision for Fair Oaks Ranch, when it was first created, you know, as a subdivision with a golf course, is way different than trying to create a hill country enclave in the middle of what's going to be a massive urban sprawl, right? And so I think it's a very good point to say that needs to be looked at. It's a plan, and that plan needs to adapt based on the new data that's coming in. And you know, the councils in place at that time should have a right to look at that periodically and make sure it still makes sense.
I kind of agree that we should be able to adapt, but we have a vision and a mission statement. And I think that it's our responsibility to make sure that what's happening within our city is adapting to what we expect and not us changing our vision to adapt to them.
One of the areas that concerns me with this is the process. So I agree with what Laura and Roy were saying. I think that we ought to have some process in place for reviewing those plans that we've had out there. Just like some of these that we've looked at, it's changed over time. The concept of what we want as Hill Country Appeal as part of Fair Oaks Ranch, I think will stay solid. It's one of our founding principles that we want to maintain the characteristic of what makes Fair Oaks Ranch Fair Oaks Ranch. The concern that I have is that we have all these plans that we put out for, we have a UDC, we now have zoning as part of it, we have a future land use map that we believe are the tools that are going to help us manage growth throughout the city. My belief right now is we really haven't utilized any of them. We're getting to that point now that any future developments, and we've had a few developers that are come in and test in the waters, but I'm not sure that we as a council have a process, an understanding, or an agreement across council. How does that process happen? Initially, I think it comes into our engineering department. They may be plats, they may be concept plans. Where does our Planning and Zoning Commission fit in as part of this? And then where as a council do we provide input to the process, especially when there are proposed changes, what would be related, proposed changes as to maybe our future land use map or our UDC? And I know that, my belief is, I don't know for sure, but most developers want that concrete, hard yes or no from council that makes the decision, and not going through the process of hearing from planning and zoning that would provide statements. But bottom line, what it really comes down to is there's a process in there of how we do this. I'm not sure if we have a full agreement. I'm not sure what I believe that process is in concept is the same as what y'all believe it is in concept.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I also think that what we've seen is we've seen at least one or two people come through the new process now. And as they've been doing that, not grandfathered ones that, we all complain about they're grandfathered, right? But the new ones that have come through, and we've realized glitches in our system. We're like, oh, wow, we have to get this approved and then this approved, then come back and get this approved. We didn't realize that because they were in 3 different parts of our comprehensive plan or our UDC. So I want to make sure we have that routine of taking that feedback and not getting mad at the resident or the person coming through the process that we wrote, but saying, right, we wrote that in a very bad way. Let us fix that for you, instead of, getting frustrated that it takes so many votes or whatever to get something done. And I think we have been taking those notes as they come through and go, oh, this is this, but we then can roll that into the next update of the comprehensive plan or the UDC, I think I was thinking about that flag lot, right? This and that and this and there. And but I think that, and I've seen a couple other things that maybe in the course of how we defined our zoning, our future land use map, it looked right when we did it, but now as I'm starting to hear about people wanting to come in and develop, you're like, why did we do that? Like, why did we say you can't have a parking lot against the frontage road of I-10? Like, why did we have that in there, And so I'm thinking about that now, and those are the type of things that I think we should review in addition to, like Roy was saying, is does it make sense how we have certain things on the future land use map for the undeveloped areas, What would that look like if someone actually did something that way, But I think that fits under 2.2, right? We already have that? I just want to make sure we already have a project for that.
I think it relates to 2.2 as well as the priority itself, 2.1 as a whole, which is manage the physical development in accordance with the comprehensive plan. If and I don't want to focus on the projects, but if you look under that, we have, we've completed or about to complete several of those currently. So coming from a position of pure ignorance, I'll ask to this body and probably look to the city manager as well. Are there items within that process itself that either we're not doing, we should be doing differently? Have we identified gaps? Do we need to perform that? Where are we generally with our comprehensive plan and its processes? I don't know the answer, but
Also, as a new guy, to a certain extent, sometimes you don't know how the plans really play out until you have to exercise the plans, right? And like with the flag lot, we now know that certain things need to be rewritten and or adjusted, not rewritten. And but I'm a firm believer that in stick to the plan. I mean, we don't want to change it every time something comes in that may not be exactly to what a developer wants to do, but we can review it and adjust accordingly, I think, is what I would like to see. I don't want to just see major hunks of plans being pulled out because it just doesn't fit what somebody else's vision of our city. I want to stick to our vision of the city, and I think that's really most important. Just saying.
The physical development of the city. So the council adopted a comprehensive plan 2018-19. I'm going to try and talk process a little bit because I'm going to ask questions so that I understand how to go back and shape and frame, because we really want to understand where council wants to be in the process. So the way it works currently, and this is similar to other cities, is the comprehensive plan is the vision adopted by council, right, for future land use, the build out of the city, what use will go where, large lots, small lots, commercial, residential. And so when a developer comes in to meet with us and they have an option on land, the first thing we do in a pre-development meeting is look at the policy document adopted by the council. Oh, this calls for 5-acre minimums. You're proposing 1-acre minimums. You're going to have to get an amendment to that. And now you have to come up with the justifications. And that decision's always made by the city council. So it sounds like to me, y'all maybe want to take a shot at just going back and reviewing again the future land use map. Is it still functional? Does this particular council still agree with what that vision is? We aren't getting, the developments that are coming in right now aren't wanting to comply with our comprehensive plan.
Or not?
Are not.
Right,
And
okay,
so
right.
that's because what we're wanting as a community is different from what
They want.
They want and what they say the market is. And so do we want to reevaluate that? When you guys hear from developers, unless it's an egregious customer service issue, which I don't believe happens a lot, it's because they're upset with the policy. I don't want 5 acres, I want less, and I want to come talk to you. And for me to spend the money, I'm wearing my developer hat, I've got to spend a lot of money on infrastructure, engineering, conceptual design, a lot of risk on me before I even have a yes or no of that entitlement. And so where does council want to be in that whole process? And then we can put that policy in place.
Yeah, I think part of what I'm hearing is, I think if the only value we got out of it is for us all to sit, because we got like 4 new members, to sit down together and understand what it says, and then an outcome of that might be that we want to go and take a review pass for purposes of maybe actually making changes. But I think all of that was kind of like developed, I don't know how long ago, it took community and engagement and everything like that to come up with that plan. And I just think it's time for a fresh look at it, if nothing else than to say we all understand it the same way, so when these questions come before council, there's that context to help with the decision making.
I'll throw out an example, and I don't really particularly have an opinion on it. It just is something that I've thought about. So we've had a lot of presentations recently from citizens asking for multimodal transportation roads. And I don't know actually where that falls on Dietz Elkhorn, if it's in our comprehensive plan to add bike lanes and all of these things. But if you talk to me personally, a rural city would not be a multimodal transportation type of a road. Do I think it's a bad idea? No. Just in general, those are the kinds of questions I have. So then we decide to redo Dietz, let's just hypothetically. So then that gets brought to us, and then we go through engineering, and they, because I'll ask 100 questions like usual, like, oh, what does this mean? We have to wait till engineering. So then we get the engineering back, and we've got this plan is presented, and they want us to approve it right away. And I'm like, but I'm still stuck back here. So those are the kinds of processes I think I'm confused on when it comes to the comprehensive plan. It may be. If that makes sense. I don't know if that's making sense.
Right, like when do
but-
we apply our vision to what's being presented?
But it's a tough question to answer. Your vision is the comprehensive plan. So let me try and dive into Ms. Munchel's comment. What does multimodal mean to you? What does it mean? And then we'll put that in the comp plan. Is that bike lanes? Is that a horse lane? And then we put that spec in the comprehensive plan. And when the developer comes, that's what we require.
Right, and up until recently, that's golf carts, right? That's multimodal, but yeah.
You know?
I just don't understand, I think, the process of how we decide to bump it forward, if that
So
makes
the
sense.
UDC is coming to you with recommendations from P&Z to change, and we will be asking, how do y'all want to go through all of that document and those recommended changes? That's the process. So just using that one example, when the UDC comes before you, there's verbiage in there about multimodal, of local street, arterial. If you want them to be multimodal, what does that mean to each? Let's define it, put it in the book, and then that's what we demand when the development comes through. It also means that's what we need to build when we build the roads.
So I guess that was my question. So it's a UDC,
Amendment.
or not. I mean, whatever happens, happens. So,
All of our development regulations are defined by the city council,
yeah.
all in the UDC. The subdivision regs, the water, wastewater, land use, everything is a policy document that we implement on your behalf. And so if there's changes you want to make to that, it'll be in the UDC.
I think maybe the UDC and the comprehensive plan is very overwhelming. I mean, it took us how many months to put it together, and I don't know if anyone has sat through in one time and read the whole thing from beginning to end. I'm sure someone on staff has, but I've read sections here and there. I've never seen it all put together. And if there's any way we can break the review into targeted sections, like under section 2.3 of this priority, let's just talk about the transportation plan and the multimodal and review that. Because, for instance, if you bring with me all the UDC changes, I guarantee P&Z is only going to care about their zoning and their future land use and anything that impacts them. But, I have things in other sections that they probably don't care about that I think I have comments on, right? And do I stop the P&Z's update to add mine, or is there another review cycle for my section that I care about,
You add two P&Zs.
Right, but that means now we're looking at the entire document at one time. So now I have to go through every single page of the comprehensive plan and find out what P&Z touched and what they didn't, and what I want to touch. And now we're going to go back to the P&Z. So I think that's the same thing we've been all talking about. It's one, we didn't realize something's in the comprehensive plan, right? And then once we do, we're like, okay, how do we get that changed? And then we're like, well, P&Z's updating it. Well, P&Z doesn't know what I want to have changed in the transportation plan,
Right. Well, some of these, I'm a little confused. Some of these items are all coming before you. You get to make the decisions. But to amend the zoning ordinance, to amend the comprehensive plan, these are all statutes that are laid out by the state of Texas. So the process we're going through is laid out for us. And it'll come to you as a document. Here's the UDC. P&Z has reviewed the entire document section by section. They're recommending these changes. That doesn't mean you're limited to that. You can review whatever we're going to be asking you that question. Do y'all want to go section by section, P&Z? It's up to y'all.
I think what Laura's saying is, and if you look at this chart that we have, it has on here, evaluate and update comprehensive plan in UDC completed in 2021. And then nothing else. So is there a way that we can have that kind of be an ongoing yellow box, even though we're
Absolutely.
supposed to review it every 2 years, but not have it come in one big thing at the beginning of the next, 2-year cycle, and instead just
You bet.
continuously maybe review it in sections?
And maybe we might approve it all at once at the end, but
Right.
like now P&Z went through this entire document and now we're going to have to go through section by section. And how long is it going to take? It would be nice if they brought us one section and then we looked at one section.
Wanted to
or
take
Yeah,
something
and
like
it-
that.
I understand what you're saying,
Yeah.
and it's however y'all want to handle it. And just know every time we amend the UDC, it's a public hearing, and we have to put notices in the paper. That's why it's brought in holistically. So if you're going to amend Chapter 2, that's an advertisement in the paper, a public hearing with P&Z and council. Then you go on to Chapter 3, and you want to amend that. It requires a public hearing. And so it's however y'all want to group and go through that process.
Well, and it's different between reviewing it and approving it. Like we could approve a section, put it down, then look at the next section and put it down, and put it all together in a.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I mean, or if it's something's urgent, we might want to.
This is kind
Absolutely.
of like a tactical comment related to Emily's point, is when I, at the beginning of this thing, said we need to maintain our readiness to be responsive and proactive to development, what we're talking about now is the tool set that we use to do that. It needs to be constantly maintained. And so what I kind of hear, just another point, projects and programs. Projects are things that are ended and you put them on the shelf and they're gone. This is a program that needs this ongoing feedback loop that says, here's an opportunity to make the upgrade. You cycle when you do the upgrades because of the process involved and do it. So to your point, I think this is a program that's got a constant stream to it, and rather than completion being the metric, it's the outcomes. And you start looking at the metrics are the outcomes of that process. It's effective when the staff and council are able to use it as a tool to do what it's intended to do. And that's kind of a real global comment with all this stuff, but I think that's the opportunity here. We almost need to have built into our legislative calendar, here's when we need to be cycling this work into, because right now it just kind of hits us as, oh my God, I got to go next week to a 5-hour meeting to talk about the UDC. And if we know it's schedulized into our work, then the job, mainly it's going to be easier for you guys on staff to get us through it, because dragging us through it's probably the absolute hardest part to it all. I think Katie's been trying to say something for
She has.
I'm basically the expert of the UDC. I've been the one that's been trying to implement it as well as possible. It has only been approved once, which was, I believe, back in 2018, 2019. And so we are going through the first round of updates and amendments, and there's a lot of them, I'm not going to lie. But the plan is to bring it back to you guys and, ask you which ways you would like it to be presented to you. And the UDC is the first tool to implement what the comprehensive plan is. The idea is after this first huge amendment and update, once it gets through City Council, is to do it on a more regular basis for big ticketed items. But, I believe a lot of cities have issues with that first amendment to their UDC, and then it gets into a good flow, so to speak.
What's the target for that, Katie?
We're in the final stages with P&Z right now. So maybe 1 to 3 meetings left on that. So I hope that helps.
August, September?
It depends when they approve their recommendations.
Gotcha. Okay.
So
I'm not trying to put you on the spot.
No,
I'm just, for my, I want to know that I'm
we
not
have
going to
a
be
meeting
sick that week.
tomorrow, and I'm hoping they approve them then, but they could always need another meeting or two, so.
They're going to
Gotcha.
schedule our review for December 24th.
I think
Merry Christmas.
yeah,
So,
I'll be on a cruise. You know, okay.
you will definitely know in advance, so.
Just as an estimate, I believe August, September would probably be the months that it's coming to council. And how many pages? 900 pages, 1,000 pages, whatever it is. Yeah, it's a long
I
document.
was born.
So I think from the discussion, and it really stood out to me, really even when I was looking at the strategic action plan, is that we probably have multiple things that we need to be reviewing and updating throughout the year, and probably developing some scheduled process where we know that these need to be introduced. I don't know that we have that. You know, if we'd looked at some type of metric or methodology of we've taken the strategic action plan and saying that, you know, through the year we want to review a pillar once a month, and then after a 5-month period, integrate it all into one process, and then it culminates with an approved strategic action plan coming out in May. And probably my thoughts are is that maybe you know, the comprehensive plan that we need to review every 2 years, instead of waiting, you know, the 720 days and deciding that, okay, it's our 2-year mark and we need to review it. If we broke it up into the different chapters, you know, we could work those on a more focused basis by entertaining the chapter every other month. But I think we probably have other things that are along. I think we're getting off of responsible growth management, but I think it relates into the discussion that we were having. If there are documents in here, if we're going to review the future land use map and we say we want to do that every, you know, 3 to 5 years, then we ought to have some schedule that lays out when it is that we're going to do that and how we integrate it into council's time, so that we're not compressing it all into like what we're going to have to do with the UDC when it comes to us. That makes sense?
Absolutely. And how we're going to source that task in general. Are we going to do it? Are we going to, you know, have a consultant do it? What does council want to do?
The only other thing that kind of relates to responsible growth management and really the essential services that we provide from the city is that as we're going through and we're looking at some of the developers are coming in with proposals that are maybe a little bit more dense than what we have in the future land use map. And I believe what we have laid out as part of our master plans in water and wastewater was based on the max build out at the future land use map development. Is that correct? And so anything that is above and beyond what we have in the future land use map is additions to what we have. So if we're adding more living equivalent units in an area, we have increased the number of water connections, and that is beyond what we have in our master water plan. Is that correct? So some of those are things that we need to keep in mind as we go through responsible growth management. And it really has to do, when we get into infrastructure, we can talk about it more, but all of the capabilities that we have as part of our water distribution system, as we're looking at making upgrades to that, those upgrades were based on a full build out of the future land use map. When we go beyond that, we're talking about additional capabilities that would be required beyond.
So does that come back, staff has to ring a bell, run the flag up to let us know, hey,
It's something that, yes, we need to keep an eye on.
because those discussions
Right.
are, it's easy to go ahead and talk about limiting our, you know, or working down on our size for our future lots. But if we don't have the connections and we don't know that,
And it's probably not just the connections, but more along the distribution capabilities that we have. So right now, hydro tanks, water tank systems that are established to handle a set capability of water user connections.
again, I'm still trying to assimilate the process. How do we as council
Right,
know that?
we don't have a process.
Well, I don't think that's 100% accurate. It depends on, again, the issue. So we have a master water wastewater plan that's based off the future land use map. So here's the assumptions that we're going to build out. Here's the water and wastewater needs to accomplish that. So if a developer comes in and wants to do something different from the comprehensive plan, they also have to now analyze the impact to the water and wastewater system. And if that requires an amendment, that would all come before y'all.
It comes to us as a
You make the
package.
final decision, yes, sir.
So this is changing the topic. Before we get done with responsible growth management, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but just wanted to encourage staff to pursue the things under 2.4, which is align proactive placemaking strategies with the MDD. But before anyone would tend to go off in a tangential direction on that.
Yeah, so
So
Councilman
there's
Rosado,
opportunity. I think there's opportunity there, and it links back to looking for, other sources of funding for things that benefit the city. So
it's a good place for me to ask the question of, what does that mean to you, proactive placemaking? What does that mean to this council?
What that means is that I believe, and this is just I'm speaking as an individual, that I believe that there's opportunities for the MDD to contribute to projects that benefit the city. And so when you say placemaking, I can think of that means all sorts of things. It can mean a monument at the entrance to the city to do, kind of a branding statement at the entrance of the city, but it can also do with some other contribution that enhances the city, or provides, a focal point for the community. And then the Civic Center obviously comes to mind, and I think we're kind of like have something pending on re-looking at the grant opportunity there, given the current
Great.
financial scenario.
Anybody else want to chime in on that proactive placemaking?
I think that for 241 and 242, I kind of like to see the plan of when you want, like kind of when you want to start working on those things and bringing it to council. Yeah, eventually the funding is going to be contingent on MDD approval, but putting together the plan doesn't need that. So I'd like to kind of see where you put that in here. I mean, I know where I want it. At least for 241, right? I don't know what 242 is. And we're not going through projects, but I guess when we come back and talk about them, I'd like to understand what each of those mean more. Like develop an MDD owner's representation consulting agreement. I don't know what that means. So I don't need to know right now, but.
Got it. And again, these were all previous council.
I know. I don't even, I mean, and I was part of that, and I still don't know what that means. So.
Yeah,
The only
if I remember correctly, that one was, hey, we might want to hire a third party to evaluate applications when they come in.
Oh,
what-
okay,
what
yeah.
I re-
So we
what
may
I-
want to remove that one.
I'm on. Would I remember that it did have something to do that I thought got resolved with the interlocal, that kind of like left other services on demand kind of a feature in that agreement, such that if the MDD's transactional volume got to the point, or the nature of the work got to the point where city staff could assist in assessing a grant application, then that would be charged to that interlocal.
I think we could look at that when we delve into the projects. I don't want to go too far into that.
Well,
'cause
no,
we
but
have
I'm
like
sa-
3
but I'm
more
saying
pillars
it's
to
kind
go.
it's kind of addressed. I almost consider it complete, but I'd have to go back and look at the agreement again to make sure.
Let's move on.
I think that was I believe it's one of our biggest pillars. We probably generated the most discussion on it. Good discussion. And I appreciate it. Is there I don't want to rush through it, but is there anything that we missed, or any other area that we want to discuss?
It's only 8 o'clock.
And honestly, there's nothing that says we have to do all 5 pillars tonight. Success is to get through all 5 pillars, but, you know, if we're going to have a lot of discussion, and which I think is more important, then I think that's good, as long as it's focused discussion on improvement. So,
Agree.
doesn't mean I want to stay here till midnight either.
We're so glad to hear you say that.
Yes. All right, Scott, we think we got enough. Tobin?
Good start. May need some help, but no, I think it's enough to put some thoughts together.
Okay.
At least we agree on the name of the pillar. That's all. I just, let's,
Break it into sections is a great idea.
okay.
Now that you mention it, no, I'm just kidding.
Next one is what's reliable and sustainable infrastructure, and if I'd kick this one off only because I want to reiterate some of the changes we made as a draft for this round, where if you looked at prior versions, much of this plan, at least at the project level, revolved around capital projects. So you'll see that the items under the priorities are thinner than they used to be because we have a whole new capital section at the end of this plan based on the priorities and the plans that this council adopted for drainage, for roadways, and for water, wastewater. So as a suggestion, kicking this off, when we're reviewing, particularly priorities 3.1, 3.2, and 3.3, some of those could be collapsed into some version of complete the CIP as identified or something to that effect. But as we move forward, what other priorities do we have or should have on this list outside of the CIP, which is important, and I think will be a whole nother discussion that we should continue along the way. But I just want to provide that context for why this may look different than it has in the past.
I don't want to say that they're not represented on here, but I want to emphasize, a couple of things. One is water supply. I think the current situation is indicating, we're on an aquifer which has got some challenges, and then our surface water source. To me, I guess the last time we got a report on that, it's not a 100% reliable source either. So I'm very interested in making sure that we do have a representation on here about water, and I'm not looking at that just from the utility perspective. I think it's kind of hard to have a viable city if you don't have a reliable water supply. So I think it needs to be represented. The other thing, and I see that it's on here, can't spot it with my eyeballs right now, but I think we ought to say that we can establish a fire protection standard for the city, and what I'm talking about is to be able to have a consistent representation of fire hydrants in all sectors of the city. I understand the infrastructure challenges on the south side of the city, but I think it needs to be somewhere out there on the radar screen to bring it to a comparable standard. Whether that's feasible or not, we can decide later, but I personally would like to see it represented on here, like what would it take to get the mains up to a standard where we could have, a reasonable number of fire hydrants on the south side of the ranch. Other than that, I think this plan is really being operationalized very effectively. So I think it's a great, we're in a good place on this piece. That's it.
I think that goes under Pillar 4.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. It has already have fire services.
Yeah. Well, what I'm particularly talking about here, because
Fire infrastructure?
it's really the mains on the south side are blocking us having an adequate number of fire hydrants, and so it's a special challenge on the south side of the ranch. And so for reliable and sustainable infrastructure, just kind of getting everything up to that common standard, and that bleeds off into a lot of other potential future issues as we begin to understand more about the utility. But here I'm really looking at, that consistent standard. And I apologize, but I don't care whether it goes under pillar 3 or 4.
What
It's
about
just-
3117? Isn't that what you're saying?
Yeah,
3117?
and that's why I said it's not that it's not represented on here. I just want to make sure that it's not one of those things that keeps getting pushed out year after year after year to say, I would like to say there is at least a feasibility study that says this is what it takes, so some council could look at it and say, maybe this can get rolled into a bond package, and here's the time when that would happen. Right now, it's just kind of this thing that keeps, floating out with the tide and doesn't really get, and I understand why, because there's other burning platforms to address, but I just think it's a critical thing to bring the city up to a consistent standard on fire protection.
Are you proposing that project, the 3117, move up from 2025? Because it's already planned for 2025.
My preference would be, but I'd say that answering that question probably is better for when we have the budget conversation about what it would take to do that and when
Okay.
the dollars could show up.
I was just wondering what you were getting at.
As a suggestion too, that one, I think, kind of to both your points, that could be a priority in of itself, because there's probably multiple projects within that
So fire protection
concept, right?
infrastructure?
Right.
or,
Yeah, rip up all the underground pipes and the whole.
Most of it is already identified in the master plan. It's a matter of going back and putting the dollars.
Right.
And that's
Inventing
why I
that.
say I think it's better to say, where do we start to schedule it? Because I think we have a lot of other things that are going to hit where if we could bundle those together in a bond package. It's a complicated discussion for tonight, so I just defer it to
Millions and
budget.
millions of dollars. It's a rebuild of pressure plane
Don't like
C.
to redo the stuff underground. That's the general rule.
And understand.
Not a good thing.
When we talk about reliable and sustainable infrastructure, and what we have listed up here, it's water services, wastewater services, drainage, roadways, and then maintaining our city facilities.
That covers that.
In the bigger picture, is there any other areas that add, any of these areas that are concerned?
Is there anything we have to worry about regarding cable, all the those things that we do franchise things for, making sure we, is there anything there we have to keep in mind? Electricity, cable.
That's one of those
the-
relationship things that I don't have anybody I know anymore, but it used to be is how the discussions like, how do the utility providers that are not ours, that serve our community, are they keeping up with the load growth in our area so that we don't have a lot of long, frequent outages for electric
Yeah.
and water supplies under stressful conditions? But to me, that's one of those things going back to managing relationships with some of our partners out there, like the CPSs and SAWs and PECs and people like that affect our community based on their infrastructure. I'm not too worried about my cable TV going. Well, I can deal with it, but it's kind of a relief every now and then.
Yeah, I just don't know what I don't know on this topic. I don't know if we should be managing it. I mean, I know that if the city of Fair Oaks Ranch can no longer provide cable to residents, no one's going to want to live here. So, how much do we manage it? How much does that just happen? I just don't know. Same thing with electricity. What is that? Do we have a relationship plan? Do we have, what do we do with CPS and PEC? I know we kind of react a lot and we interact with them, but what type of things do we have to do with them? Is there something we should put as a priority area? I don't know.
We don't go to CPS or PEC and say, what's your load for this city? When a development comes in, it's developer's responsibility to go to that utility and get all that verified and get all the easements and everything put on the plat. We don't manage other people's utilities.
Do we have a relationship with,
We have contacts over there that review the developments that are getting submitted to us. So as an example, when someone comes in for a subdivision, and Katie can respond to this, they have to submit it to all the different entities that serve the area, and each of those entities reviews it, and ultimately it rolls up onto us, getting the entitlements in place. But the infrastructure is built by others and inspected by others.
Yeah,
Maybe
so.
if I could just give some insight where my question comes from. So one of my complaints to my old peers that most is that the way CPS works is the board is appointed by council members, and when they go for a rate case, they go to the council districts and say, here's what we're going to do for your area. Fair Oaks Ranch, and I'm just picking on my old buddies, Fair Oaks Ranch is not represented because we're not City of San Antonio. We don't have a council representative, so we don't have a seat at that table. It takes a relationship to say, and they know what their outages are and stuff, and they know the reasons, but it's using those relationships to advocate that they keep their system or make investments in their system so that they can sustain the load growth out here. And that's what it's beyond caught up with them. I mean, they're it's getting marginal, and that's why we're having the outages. And I can't explain for PEC. They're a little bit different because they're a co-op and not as familiar with the process. But that's kind of what I'm talking about, and then you can talk about what happens with the subdivision stuff.
Yeah, so we do have a development come in. We have a letter of certification. San Antonio kind of does the same thing, but it goes to basically every single utility that is out here. That would include Gray Forest, CPS, PEC, AT&T. I can keep going, but I'm just not going to. So they basically shows that it's a letter from signed off by the utility that they have looked at their plan and that they have the allocation for them, or they have plans to bring their services out to the new development. Electrical utilities typically do have master planning. I feel like we would know about that if there were major gaps within the electrical distribution. If there were a lot of major power outages happen around here, I feel like we would have gotten some concerns, and we definitely have working relationships with CPS and PEC specifically. I don't know if we have any with the cable companies, but that is definitely something we can work towards. I'm just saying on the plotting side, we definitely have communications to make sure that they are able to provide service to our area.
I think that, I appreciate that. I think, and if it's working, that's great. I just don't know, as a council or other governmental entities, if they do have some strategy or some plan that we don't have to ensure that that continues, right?
These are also chapters we could add to our comprehensive plan. Take fiber as an example. If one of the council's goal was to have fiber throughout the community, then we would go start planning with those entities that provide that service and help develop a master plan that would also come into ours, and making sure everybody, when developments come in, is coordinating those efforts.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not proposing that we provide wireless internet to the city or anything like that. But I am saying is there anything that we should be doing that we're not doing, or would be good practice to do, to ensure that everything stays as is or well? Because it seems to be fine now, but I mean, it's when it becomes not fine that we said, oh, maybe we should have done that, right?
Exactly.
I don't know, so have you seen that in any other one else's plans about maintaining those type of things?
I don't know if I completely understand your question.
Ensuring the.
I've never worked for a city where we went out to the different utility providers and said, show us what you're going to do and how you're going to maintain the grid in our community.
Okay.
That's their utility to manage. We have enough going on in our own world to be responsible for someone else's utility. Now, I've seen plans where it's just rubber stamped, so when a developer comes through, hey, have you gone to CPS in this case? Here's their master plan. You need to go verify, get a letter of certification that you're complying with their plan, but it's not up to us to enforce. and we don't really have any authority to make those corrective actions.
I'm not, we don't have to add it. I just want to make sure that we're not missing something that we should have. If it doesn't make sense, then
I
let's
think
not do
having the
that.
relationships, especially at the council level with those entities, would be really good because we would understand what their master planning. I think it was a year and a half ago, CPS is, they're building their new transition center or whatever it is, similar to what we have down here on the end of Deeds Elkhorn on the other side of I-10, and they were required by law to have those plans posted publicly. They had them here on city campus for over a year. I think 2 people signed to review them.
So like, this is only an answer for CPS again, but I think it's an important provider. But, I was told that there's an organization of the suburban cities that has been able to speak with a common voice to CPS. They're people that don't have a San Antonio City Council rep, district influencing their rate case, but the suburban cities, as part of CPS's certificated area, get a voice, and that's just another opportunity for a group that we could try to latch into and at least say, hey, we've had a lot of load growth out here. We're seeing more outages and longer duration outages. What's y'all's plan to bring your infrastructure up to par with? And I know they're trying to build substations, but it's just another place where we can connect. To me, cable's just totally, how many dollars can they make? They're going to go where the density is first and serve that, and that's just part of that answer. But
Okay, I just wanted to make sure we not missing a pillar, you asked. Yep,
Yeah,
a
I mean,
priority.
it's something, because obviously we do have franchise agreements with our providers, and those are to a large degree revenue driven, but there are also provisions, and I'll confess I haven't looked at the ones here, but review use of right of way. Some cities, usually larger cities, frankly, are more successful in putting other types of development expectations into them, but whether it's a pillar or not, I think, or a priority, I think it's worth a review of those franchise agreements that may, whether or not that's been done recently, I'm not sure, but I haven't looked at them, I can tell you that.
that's something that said it's
Yeah.
scheduled.
I mean, I was just thinking in general, what if EVTC or some of the internet providers are like, hey, we don't want to provide internet to your area anymore. Like, at some point they would come to us as we would have to solve this problem, right? I mean, internet has become pretty much required to do life nowadays. I can't even open my front door without the internet. I do wonder, do we have a responsibility to ensure continuity of service, even not necessarily with a particular provider, but just in general, right, to residents?
And I have one other quick area to talk about in water, and it kind of relates to what we were talking about. SAWS provides water utility for the communities within our city, or 3 of the communities within our city. And I think in some retrospect, because of the issue that we had with water, in the big freeze that we had, is there some concept where we want to look at partnering with them or finding a way as a backup part of that system? These are residents of Fair Oaks Ranch. We do have a water utility. They're currently under another water utility. That water utility failed. And do we have a responsibility to help out, back up, or provide an option when that utility fails? I don't know that I know the full answer on that. I know what I would like to see is that we are a city that provides backup, but I don't know where that responsibility line is drawn, what capabilities that we can provide and support it. And I just talked earlier about, when you add a number of water connections to our city, what does that really mean to our capabilities? And this would be a large number of connections that would be added. Can we handle that?
It becomes a humanitarian effort at that point.
Right.
Well,
And is that a service that we want to get into and start providing?
And we had talked about, the possibility of coming to agreement. There's, various standards and constraints, and I don't know if one of those constraints about mixing Edwards water with other sources kind of stuff is still in play about having an interconnect with SAWS so we could do mutual, kind of resiliency stuff. And, I always thought that that was something that was I guess I was under the impression that that was something that was continuing to be looked on, but, it's kind of like as the opportunity presents itself. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about. And some of the other improvements that we were planning on making on the water system, I had understood the last time we talked about it that they might help enable that. But again, it's kind of like having those relationships and stuff, because recently, SAWS is kind of in I guess a retraction mode. They're backing out of Kendall County and stuff like that. So they're retrenching, maybe is a better word. They're kind of going back to their traditional certificated area. So I don't know what the opportunities are, but it's something I think that's worth exploring, or at least having a relationship, if nothing else, that we get better communications if there is an issue with the supply in those parts of our community, that we can respond to it.
So generally, where would the council put, relative to our approved CIP and the water and wastewater projects that you have, putting an interconnect project in there? Because right now it's not one of our top projects. And so one of the reasons we're not putting a whole lot of time onto those is because those are not prioritized by the council. It's in the master plan to have that interconnect. There's a whole lot of mini projects that come with something like that. The chemistry of the water, the pressure of the system, right? It's not just connecting two pipes. There's a whole lot that goes into that, surface water, groundwater. And so I know you don't have to answer this question tonight, but if that's something that's important, we need to make sure it gets put into the CIP and vetted that way and then advanced as one of the priorities.
Right, it would have to do what every other project does, is it have to be feasible, and the benefits would have to outweigh the risks and warrant the cost. And then it has to be ranked with all the other opportunities we have to spend a lot of money while we're trying to, not impact tax rates. So if that answers that.
It certainly can be done. It's really, where do you want to prioritize it as an initiative?
My sense is right now we have a lot of other things on the list that have been languishing. But that's kind of where I was just trying to explain where I always understood that thing was, and the opportunity was to improve, reliability of the system more from our side. And if it really had those benefits, it would start to rise to the top, given the other things that we're trying to do to make those improvements across all our 3 pressure planes.
Understand.
I was going to say, I think that we have to be careful with the idea of humanitarian efforts and bailing out people when situations happen. And just thinking about the water example, we had the issue with SAWS, but you've got a small portion of the city on wells, and every person I know in the back 40 almost lost their well, and we lost our wells for a week. So does that mean we're going to bail out every person that has an issue with their well? So I just think that we need to be very careful how we move forward with things like that. I'm not saying don't help people, just thinking those things through. And, if it's going to come from the funding of the city or the funding of, water utilities, for example, I don't pay into water utilities. So if you bail me out with water funds, that seems kind of wrong. So I think we just need to be careful how we proceed forward with things like that.
Anything else?
So I'm hearing that Tim certainly want to review and adhere to the capital improvements plan that's been adopted recently. We talked about potentially reviewing franchise agreements, possibly prioritizing or upgrading, if you will, fire protection standards. I think that
With our infrastructure, I'm sorry to
ahead.
interrupt you. We can continue to talk about projects all day long. We've got projects to last 30 years and then some. What we really need to concentrate on, in my opinion, what I'd recommend to the council is the next step is coming up with the financing plan, the business plan to start advancing these projects and to add the resiliency into our system. It doesn't do us any good to keep talking about projects. Let's talk about how we're going to pay for them. And then you've already prioritized them. We can always, every year, a couple times a year, check that prioritization to make sure that we don't need to pivot based on some new information. As an example, if less development occurs in a certain area, maybe we can downsize some of our infrastructure planning. We don't need to do a project, or maybe we have to upsize it. But we really need to put a business plan in place to finance these.
So, closing comment on that. I just think it's not wise to undersize infrastructure because you have a lull in growth that may be convincing you that you're not going to get to that level of at final build out. And I'll go back to the example. Nobody ever thought we needed more pressure on the south side, so there's little tiny pipes, and we can't do what we need to do to serve that part of the city from a fire protection perspective. So I guess I'm just saying if I'm around, I'm going to be an advocate for, having qualified engineers design the system based on, the science of doing that and build it the right way the first time, because it's really hard to go redo those infrastructure things. You might be able to say, well, I got a 40-year plan and I can do this for 15 years and I'm going to spend some more money and do this. I get that part, but don't undersize it to try to save dollars today that you're going to end up paying the consequences down the road. And I do agree we need to move on with how we're going to pay for it. Absolutely.
I think one last question that would help me, not dissimilar to that, probably was specific with regard to priority 3.5, which is city facilities. I don't know if there are any comments from the council as far as past or future needs. We probably still need to have a formal facilities master plan, at least in terms of maintenance. Any other comments there?
I think we need to move forward with a plan to have a campus that serves the citizens, and to do that, the staff has to be adequately housed and have appropriate places to do their work in a productive manner. I don't know what else to say about it but that. And I'll circle back to the thing about exploring ideas with the MDD to how to help with that.
We have a request, as an example, for an agenda item to talk about the Civic Center and possibilities, and we're planning on doing that in the budget process, but right now it's at a very high level. Here's the projected dollar amount, right? And is this something that is a priority that we need to figure out how to finance and pay for in our budget? A facilities master plan. It's taking a look at build out. How much square footage, not only of office space, but land does the city need to own and operate to have spoil sites, water tanks, all of those things at build out. Some of those projects have been canceled over the last few years. We've identified them as needing to be done, but where do they fall in the council's prioritization again? Because what comes out of this plan, if you tell us a facilities master plan is important, now my job is to go back and work with the team and come up with some funding and to see if you're wanting to approve that in the annual budget each year.
So I guess to me, I see some of this stuff as being just like all the other infrastructure questions. Like I'll pick on one of the things I think we've talked about in the past is a public works facility. And we're 7,500 landlocked acres. The good Lord only made each little piece of land one time, and so I think you have to move earlier rather than later and saying here's where that site is and get it secured, because otherwise it's going to be gone, and then what do you do? So just I think it's worth doing some forward-looking planning on that, knowing that arguably you needed facilities already and making do. We're kind of always, when we have road work and everything, aren't y'all always like trying to say, well, where do we put this and where do we put that? the materials that have to be staged and stuff. It's going to be an ongoing challenge, and it's going to get harder and harder as we keep building out.
As a city, we are, as an entity, organization, we are land poor. We don't own a lot of land. But there also has never been a lot of critical thinking into that because we're a maturing organization and we're still developing and defining our core services and what we need long-term. And I don't think we need to advance. I would recommend we not do a facilities master plan this budget year. I don't even think we have the capacity to process it and hire a consultant to help us do it. Plus, I don't think we're quite ready on our build out, especially if we're going to review our comprehensive plan, you know, in the coming year. But it's certainly something that needs to be done. We will be bringing in conversation back about the Civic Center. And again, it's more at a high level funding, unless council wants to see something down in the weeds a little bit more from a functionality standpoint. But you know, we're looking at 1.8 plus $2 million for Civic Center that we were talking about a few years ago. You know, 2,500 square feet. Cost of everything has gone up, and so the question becomes: is the Civic Center and having that use and function, that new service to the community, does it climb the priority list, and do we want to fund it? If the answer is yes, then it's our job to go figure out a strategy to bring forward to council to consider.
One last item on Pillar 3, because I'm ready to move on, but I just thought of this. Under 3.1, I don't see a project in there. One of the things that we have been giving a lot of priority to is ensuring we maintain the documentation for our water system. We've put a lot of work into that, and I don't see that in one of our projects. I know we prioritize it, you know, making sure the easements and all those, the plats and everything is written right for our water wells, for our water system. We put a lot of money and priority in that, but I don't see it in one of our lists. So I think maybe under 3.1, if we could retroactively and put that in there so that.
But on the spot, I don't have the wording in my head, but we'll develop
I
something.
would have said something more eloquent if I
It's a
could
good
think of
idea.
how to say it. So,
Ready to
Okay.
move on?
Yes, sir. Pillar 4 is, hit that one, Amanda. Public health, safety, and welfare, which I guess we traditionally think of that as our police department, which is one of our top priorities, but that, of course, that also encompasses our fire and emergency services and possibly some others as well, which I think we'll talk about. I think that just to tee it off, Mayor, my question is very broad as it relates to the priorities themselves, and when we talk about enhancing and ensuring continuity of police services, fire services, et cetera, what does that mean to you specifically? And are there services or critical areas, responses, et cetera, that we're not meeting or that we want to, well, enhance, as it says, but what do we want to make sure it stays as it is? Are we looking for enhancements? That's my question.
You know, the one thing that is yet kind of same point like Laura just made, that we do a whole lot of it. I don't see it represented on here unless my eyeballs are missing it. But community engagement, because, you know, I think it's a big part of what our department does, and I consider it a very important part. And I think it ought to be represented on here, because if it has to get to the point where it's going to compete for an allocation of dollars to make sure it keeps going, then I would like to see it pointed out on this list.
under 4.4 somewhere.
I could go just so it's on here somewhere. I'll let Chief decide where it best fits.
Yeah, kind of documenting some of the things we do already that we want to keep funding. Yeah.
SRO program, there's a lot of talk in the region and in the country about SRO program. Would council be okay if we add some information in here about an SRO program?
Well, I see that, like, that's,
There.
that, but I'm talking about all things like
Oh, it's
Junior
already
Police
there.
Academy
Okay.
and all the other things that the department does. I mean, it's impossible for me to list them unless we really want to stay late. But, you know, I just think it ought to be represented on here because
Yeah.
then again, it's that if it's in the plan, then we are going to consider it for an allocation of budget.
On the, sorry, on the SRO program, that's going to be implemented this year, right? Or is it?
Hopefully.
If we can hire some officers.
We are going to be bringing a whole lot of information forward to you during the budget process. There's certainly an initiative. There's a lot of moving parts with that. The funding mechanism, the split in the costs, interlocal agreements between us and the school district. So yes, we hope to have that up and running, but a lot of information that I'm still trying to obtain and develop along with the chief. What does that mean? Do we need to add officers? Are we going to take officers off our existing staff and implement them into the schools? A lot of information, but the goal is, yes, ma'am, to have that up and running for this coming school year.
Just high-level question. I see a lot of things in 2023 that are yellow that I know we're talking about funding for the budget. Does that mean after we approve the budget, some of those will turn green? Okay, got it. They're just yellow now because we haven't approved the budget, but as soon as we approve the 2023 budget, they'll turn green. Which, okay, good. I just wanted to make sure I understood what we were doing here.
We drafted this a while back. Like you said, a lot of them were in development, so we, I guess, generically called it planning. If and when they became approved, we would complete said plans and move into the active phase.
Got it, okay.
Quick question. In our meeting the other night when we were talking about the COLA, a conversation that we came up was specifically a question that I had asked was regarding the police officers and I think the salaries, and something that we talked about was theirs were some of the lower and our highest turnover rates and all of those things. So if we're looking at 4.1, we're implementing the salary benefit program and it looks like it's completed and operational. Is that something that we need to do again to ensure that we have it correct? Because the one thing that I don't want to have an issue with is losing police and turnover and salary and all of those things. So that's just a question.
So it really should be like a yellow because
Well, it should be like a yellow in 2024. And
Yeah, I think it
2026,
should be an
whatever.
ongoing thing that we consider keeping up with, I guess, instead of saying it's operational and functional, because if we're still having issues with that, which it sounded like we were, then I think it's something that we need to be on top of to ensure the safety of our community.
And I think that's a really good point because we're down 4 officers as it is. And I asked the question the other night, were we planning to add headcount to cover this? Because, you know, I think we have to stick, if the operational plan said we were properly staffed for, you know, patrolling and administering the department, and now we've added a new scope of work, you know, I think we need to, if we're going to have these functions, we need to resource them. And so, you know, I expect that to be part of that. And to Chesley's point, you know, we got to solve the issue of, because I know you're going after the top quality people. Well, right now, every other community in the state's looking for school resource officers on top of the shortfall that there already are in qualified people. So I think it's something that's going to really be a challenge to tackle. And probably going to have to spend some dollars to do it.
I'd like to just see that it's continued, not dropped off.
I think I certainly agree with you. We'll change the language because that just needs to be an ongoing. I think when we originally wrote this, it was when we were doing the compensation study to make sure, because we develop a different tier system for the police department. So that has been checked off, but now we need to maintain and sustain it. What about the fire utilization study? As everybody knows, that project did not advance. We actually cut ties with the consultant that was working on that project. Is it something that council's interested in moving forward again this budget cycle?
I say yes. need that.
I agree. I just, obviously
For
there's an
both.
expectation we'll be able to get some usable work product this time because, and hopefully we'll learn something. I'm not thinking we're to the point where we would pull the trigger on, but we just always need to understand, what the long-term picture there is, because we always get the thing, why don't we have our own fire department? And then also to better understand my part, you probably totally understand, what the long-term relationship we're going to be able to sustain with ESD to provide our services.
I definitely think we still need to know that, with just a different vendor.
We'll leave it in for now. One of the items I want to do is I'll make sure that every council member has a copy of the previous RFQ so that you at least have an understanding of what the study, what the value add was going to be, since you have an opportunity to add or subtract from it as we move forward. But from a funding perspective, it sounds like we're at least interested in continuing to talk about it.
I think maybe under 4.2 and 4.3, and maybe we don't have to put that in there, but just kind of something about maintaining the interlocal agreement with our current service providers, because, it does require some amount of energy every few years, because those contracts end and we have to.
You're doing a great job at that.
Thank you. I know. I want credit for it. Put it in there. And then 4.5, I think it goes under that section, but I know we've already talked about evaluating a new emergency communication system or an outreach system, whatever we want to call that. We've probably put that in there.
I was going to ask about that.
Yeah.
We ran a code red, is that correct? We did we send
We're doing
that, or was it
we're doing the
notify me?
sign-up push right now, I believe, and then
Okay.
we're going to be doing a test shortly, and then Chief and Joanna and some others are vetting different.
What did the firework go out as? I got a text
It
about
was a
that.
code red.
It was a code red. So I guess, did we,
I was gone, so we used Code Red to cancel the fireworks
Okay.
show. Okay.
No,
But
No.
it was
notify
for
me.
not
It
to
was
shoot
notify me.
fireworks.
no, not to shoot the fireworks was, I believe, a code red.
Those
Yeah, okay.
reminders on that,
Yes, it was. And so I guess that was my question. Did we make any kind of, Facebook post or say, hey, we sent out a code red. If you thought you signed up for it and didn't get it, let us know.
It was well communicated.
I don't think we've done that yet.
Everybody knew not to shoot off fireworks.
But they did it anyway.
Understand the capture rate. Yeah.
So right following after that, we actually sent up the Facebook or social media notifications to tell people to sign up for Code Red. So it was the reminder to say, hey, this is a platform we've got. Please make sure you get signed up.
Did we get anyone?
We don't get notifications
Oh.
on who signs up, but that would have been good to know.
That's hard to know.
I had a quick add to the police services, and maybe it's covered under the utilization study that we did. But our environment is changing continuously, especially as San Antonio expands out into this area. It seems that criminal activity is also coming out more towards this area. And so really it's probably something handed more over to Chief, but if we're doing an analysis, self-awareness of, what's going on in our community, and then a realization or a determination of the assets that are needed to ensure that we maintain a safe community. Do we have the assets needed, capabilities, the resourcing needed to maintain a safe community? I just think it's one of the pluses of Fair Oaks Ranch that we maintain a safe community. So finding the capabilities to ensure that we maintain that same level, I believe, is important. And I don't know that it's impacted our community at all. I see the awareness, what's going on at the RIM, what's going on at HEB, and then you hear about a lot of stolen cars that are happening around the area. I'm not sure that it's impacting us yet, but it's not something that I would like to see in our community, so how do we keep it from getting into our community?
Close their garage doors.
Watch the compensation plan, hire more people.
Well, it's a combination of everything. Thankfully, the council funded the utilization study, and we learned a lot of information from that from a coverage perspective. One of the items that we're working on now, and it'll come forward in this budget season and future budget seasons, is how do you use technology to help with your public safety. It's not always about adding manpower or FTEs. Maybe it's a different technique or strategy or technology, and so we're looking at all of those. But point noted, Mayor.
We haven't talked about this, I think, in a very long time, but is it in the desire to ever get body cams? And should that be on here?
We did talk about that early on.
I don't remember
last
if
year.
we ever decided, because I don't see it anywhere on the long-term strategy, if that's one of our priorities or not.
I'll let Chief address that, but it hasn't been mandated yet by the legislature, but is it something we want to get into? And then we have to talk about the data storage and all the needs that come with that.
I think it's a great
Key point
idea.
was storage. Suzanne? The storage space that we have right now doesn't allow us the opportunity to bring body cameras on. So me and Brian, with this proposed budget coming up, are looking to move some of that storage to the cloud, which will free up some of that space, which will make the body cams more possible, probably either next year or the year following, depending on funding.
Maybe we should put that on our strategic plan.
I think we should.
Okay.
I think having body cams is a
No, what's your
really good
thoughts,
idea.
Scott?
And a great opportunity to look for outside funding through grant money and everything else for body cams. So it's out there. The feds have offered it out to a lot of small departments.
Well, there's a lot of nonprofits that will
Yeah.
could possibly provide some of the funding too.
Great.
Good call, Laura.
One of the items on here, I don't think you need to change anything, but just as a heads up, under 4.5, we will be advancing this year some emergency operation training. We've got a new council bringing you the manuals and how the system works, making sure everybody understands their roles and responsibilities, and then giving y'all an opportunity, of course, to shape and frame that if you want to change anything up. But since we have a new council, it's important, and we have a lot of new staff. We need to go through some training and some exercises.
Are we going to do like a simulation exercise where we have to sleep here overnight or anything like that?
Some of us can tell you it's not the funnest thing in the world.
Probably
But
doing
yes,
it
we
6
certainly-
months on a ship, you get to sleep with
There you
sleep
go.
in the
Can't
same
compete
ship
with
with
that.
everyone you work with.
But we certainly need to do a better job as a community of simulating some events, and so that's our goal this year.
We want to do Pillar 5. Can we do it?
Yeah, well, at the risk of dragging this on past the sale here, one question selfishly, because it's under my bailiwick, I guess, is whether or not there's anything under the municipal court system that belongs under this pillar. We do have some, and talking ahead, we do have some operational streamlining type projects under the next pillar, Pillar 5, that relates to the administration of the court system itself. But under public safety, obviously that is one link in the broad chain, that is public safety. So I don't have anything specifically in mind, but I just wanted to throw that to the council.
We had talked about making the lobby area safer, making the area up here safer for the judge. And I just don't know how much of that has been really looked into as far as the safety glass and things like that.
They do the assessment earlier this week? Yeah, so assessment was recently done, and we're waiting on the results of that.
Oh, good,
So
okay.
we just did a walkthrough.
Yeah,
Was
they
it-
did the walk.
Was it yesterday?
Should we put that on, could a priority on there, like for municipal court?
That's
I
what,
think so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if it's not covered on one of the other priorities, I think it is something that we ought to track.
The only other item, and I'm glad you mentioned municipal court because I forgot, but I think we've talked a couple times at the committee level about advancing a court of record.
Yes, I was
Yep.
about to say that one. Yep.
Yep, we've been
I
talking
know the
about
judge
that.
is interested in having that conversation, so.
Put that on there too.
So I think it's a good thing, and I'm ambivalent whether it goes under, public safety or operational excellence, as long as it's represented somewhere. Good stuff.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
That I'm ambivalent as to whether it's under public health, safety, and welfare or operational excellence.
gotcha.
The points that were raised about the court, but as long as they're on there.
Okay, that helps.
I say
we're
we
missing?
knock out pillar 5.
I was just going to offer up, to me, the court system really relates to our public health, safety, and welfare. I think it just makes sense to track it under that pillar, and then probably to add some priority that relates to our overall court system in there. And then
Do we add it to the pillar name, like public health, justice, safety, and welfare?
Justice League.
I don't know, like, whatever, legal. I don't know.
I mean, I'm okay with that.
Okay,
Yeah.
or we could just leave it how it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can add
We can
judicial
play with that.
administration or something in there.
Yeah.
Oh, good, good, I like that.
Thank you. Guess we move on to the last pillar, which is operational excellence, and I guess this is kind of the all-encompassing, or sometimes what I joke with, other duties as assigned. This is a wide range of administrative functions, so HR, IT,
Court.
Roy just
those
pointed
are-
out that the municipal court is in
But,
here.
but it's the
and I
operational
mentioned-
aspects, it's the administrative
there are some
aspects. I think the
administrative
things we were
portions of
talking
court in
about
here, yes.
were more like public safety. I agree.
Judicial.
Communications, so. So
what-
broadly, I think, where some of these go, the priorities as they were developed previously, we had a priority for HR programs, develop a proactive communication strategy, and the rest were sort of developed under the umbrella of updated service delivery and best practices. So what would help me, I guess, is a dialogue of within those scope of services, are there specific priorities within those programs that we could flesh out to make them a little more specific to updating particular programs, as opposed to simply seek out best practices, which I think we should be doing anyway. But what does the council see in the administrative realm?
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Scott.
I do notice a lot of green and blue in these boxes. So I think that may be a little streamlining or, continuing type of, let's kind of pare this down a little bit. From that standpoint, especially in the court area. But I do think that staying on track and continually reevaluating the processes is a necessary step.
So I'm looking at 5.5 stuff, and I don't have a specific line item, but the thing, like I'm seeing, and to Scott's point, greens and blues. Of course, there's a yellow way back in 2020 that didn't go anywhere on cybersecurity processes and procedures. And what I'm thinking here, especially when you see a line item like conduct IT risk analysis and vulnerability assessment, we keep adding applications to improve operational performance, and the things we're doing in HR, we're doing records management stuff, everything. So we're adding a lot of functionality to the city. And I guess what's not apparent to me on this thing is that we're making the investments not only in our IT infrastructure, but also with all of that going, we're increasing our functionality, but the the risks out there in the environment are being magnified on a daily basis. And so where's the investment in kind of walling our environment off from all of those threats? And I guess I would like to see that represented on here, because I truly believe it's going to take some investment in dollars to address those kind of issues. At this hour, it's hard for me to articulate exactly how to represent it. I guess Brian could work.
You look at page 14, Roy.
Page 14.
That's the entire IT.
13.
But I guess
It's the entire plan with every single project on it.
Yeah, but I don't, it's not jumping off the page to me at this priority level, and I guess that's maybe the where it could be. I just want to see a line item there, because, you know, we go back also, we've won all these awards, you know, for our financials. Well, the foundation of that is your systems that process you and summarize your transactions are all part of that are all at risk if something goes wrong with our IT environment. So I would just like to see it represented as a line item on here, so that I can see a yellow, it's in planning, and a green, it has budget, and then I can go drill down into all the little things that Brian's got going on in his shop to make that stuff happen. But I just want to see it at the priority level, is I guess what I'm saying.
I agree with you, because I actually think all of the CIPs that are in the backups or whatever, there should be a line item in the main pillar to say, execute page 8, you know, like execute the CIP in accordance with whatever.
I think part of, was it page 8, or page 8 is the,
Okay.
whichever one.
Yeah,
the
whatever, page,
projects are
page
on.
11, 12, 13, whatever.
I'd call attention, because Brian, I've talked about, and the city manager certainly has emphasized 5.5.1, which is basically development of an IT master plan, which I would agree probably should be elevated to its own priority. Poor Brian has been, and Jason as well, has been scoped with a lot of individual, for lack of a better, piecemeal projects, all of which have been good, so it's not pejorative, but how did they all link together into the ultimate needs, whether it relates to productivity issues? I think Councilman Elizondo was speaking at least broadly to cybersecurity and risk, not just that, but that's a big component for sure.
Well, and at some point, you know, when you take all of these disparate apps and you're trying to like get them all to run on your current platform, you know, it seems like at some point you also get into that thing where you say, I can see the time when, as these applications keep getting added and the, you know, platforms they need to run on, it's just going to drive me to basically kind of redo all that, your core infrastructure. I don't know. I'm not as in touch as I used to be, but there's going to be a place where, you know, you start bringing in, you know, the stuff from the PD and everything like that. You know, at what point do you just say, I have to, you know, create a different environment to make all this work efficiently, and for, you know, a shop your size to be able to reasonably run it without having to, you know, put on your Superman suit every time you come to work, you know?
Okay, I have a project, but I'm not sure which priority area it would go under. So we should probably have something in here about regularly evaluating and update our home rule charter. I don't see that on here, because it does take significant amount of support to do that, and we should probably plan those out. I know we haven't done that when it was probably up, so we should probably put that in there. And then I would like to beef up 5.2. I don't know what any projects, and we don't have to talk about the projects today, but I think that pillar, I'd like to see more projects under 5.2. We could talk about that more when it's time for project time. But I don't know where you would put the home rule charter review and update, if that would be 5.3 or, I don't know.
We can work with that one. I mean, it could be its own priority, but we can,
Okay.
but it's well taken. I've seen that, and actually all the other plans that have worked on some version of review and or update the charter. That makes complete sense.
Okay.
I wanted to drill down just a little bit on the communications strategy specifically. It was a priority through the administration and this council specifically in the last year. Obviously, we've added a multimedia communication specialist who's running our live stream right now, doing a fantastic job. And I think that, generally speaking, the idea was to use the word be more proactive, more upfront, public-facing outreach through social media and other channels. Are there any gaps there, I think, that we are in reaching residents, not just from a medium perspective, like the type of social media, but any types of information or outreach that we're not getting that we should work on? Right, and and with social media specifically, we have some data which will be coming to a council meeting near you soon, but more, not just in the social media realm, which I think is obviously very important, but are there just outreach to residents, stakeholders generally? Is there anything that we should be looking at adding or changing how we do things?
I don't think we've really had a chance to do this yet. I think one of the suggestions that I had made when we were talking originally about having a new communications individual is when we do our major projects, which hopefully we're starting some of the drainage stuff, some of the bigger projects that we're approving, being out in front of those and communicating those first and effectively before the project start. Again, we haven't really had any of that yet, but I think that's going to be one important thing for them to focus on is, having that information and being out there with it proactively.
Yeah, I don't have the specific thing, but, as the opportunities come up for things, we need to kind of have, like, from experiences we've done in the past, we've talked about things like updating the comprehensive plan, taking looks at stuff like that, that we may want to consider how, town hall meetings may fit into some of our future upcoming large initiatives. How do we get, how do we do, it seems like in the past we did a pretty good job of those without even the resources we have now. And I don't know that it really goes on here, but it's just something to factor in. Tobin, I don't know if there's anything you forecast that would be an effective communication tool to use that we've got in the upcoming year, like any initiatives or anything that we would be kicking off, or just whether we would see as an opportunity if we are going to do something like take a fresh look at something like the comprehensive plan, how a town hall where we give citizens a chance to look at pictures and give us feedback like we did last time would work into that kind of thing.
That was actually going to be very similar to what I was going to suggest, except instead of having it event-driven, to have a regularly scheduled town hall twice a year, once a quarter, where council goes and just gives an update to the residents on big things that are happening and allow them to ask questions. Because up until now, we held a town hall on a topic of our choosing, and that's all that we talk about. But having town halls that allow the residents to say, hey, what's going on with this, and have those open communications with council, I think is a great opportunity. And not to mention, we would have some things we'd want to share with them, but it's also their opportunity to ask us questions. I don't know how we do that. You know, obviously we'd have to figure it out without having an agenda and all this stuff, but you know, I think that regular town hall opportunity is just a good thing I'd like to see.
I think the communication strategy to me is one of the hardest challenges that we face, and it's how do we communicate what's going on with city staff and from council in the most effective ways to get it out to our residents. And I believe there are a lot of measures, there are a lot of systems that we put in place. We don't have all the evaluation back on them, but are they effective? I think they are effective. I think they have become more effective this year. I believe there is still some more work to do to help us communicate with our community. And I believe that what Laura brings up, other methods of how we can do that to complement, you know, if our primary method is through Notify Me, that we get information out from the city, you know, do we have some type of program that there's still people that I know that don't even know what Notify Me is. And so do we have a program that, and how do you put it out? How do you get people informed about Notify Me, get them to sign up? But, you know, if that's our primary method, or if it's not, whatever is our primary method, but then how do we complement that with other methods of getting information out? And it ought to be overlapping in a multitude of other ways that we can do it, all with the focus on communicating with residents to get the information out that we currently have.
This is just a way of working this in, I guess. But so like I just got around to looking at it today. I don't know how long it's been out there, but Kelsey's video on water conservation, she did an excellent job, and I know there's a lot of other resources that go into making that look that good from my own personal experience. But so, you know, those are really good, and I think we ought to make sure that those things continue. The only thing I'd like to see is, like, if there's some way we can figure out to find out, kind of to the mayor's point, like, what's the reach on those things? And do we have access to that data about the reach, and then, or what can we do to improve it? Because I think you'd be hard pressed to improve the video, but we might be able to find a way to get it out to where more people see it, if we understand, you know, what's going on there with the channels that we're using for that stuff.
The short answer is we do, and that was the coming soon part I was mentioning. And Joanna, if you want to expand, you can. But we do have engagement numbers for the different platforms. They use different terminology. I think where we're tracking right now is compared to what, right? So we've been using those dashboards for each platform in place, Google Analytics. So establishing a baseline, working from there. But yes, we do have some.
Yes. So recently, Casey has put together this fabulous report that I'm excited to share with you at some point, as Scott alluded to, in our departmental update. But it does. So right now, we're tracking the platforms that we utilize. Civic Plus, which is our main hub, we kind of direct everybody back to the city website as our #1 source for information. So with that is the Notify Me program, if you sign up for it. So right now, they've just recently switched to Google Analytics. So we are in the process of ensuring that we've got all our I's dotted and T's crossed from the legal perspective to make sure that we can incorporate that to get those statistics. But on our social media platforms, like the YouTube channel that's live streaming this meeting tonight, our Facebook, which is something we've had even since before I came on. And then, of course, we've enhanced some of the programs. So we're now on Nextdoor. We're also on LinkedIn. We also have a Twitter account that we are posting to. So some of those are newer. We're testing them out and seeing kind of how work, how they respond. But we are getting analytics like how many people are we reaching? What's the engagement level? How many people are seeing it and sharing it? How many new followers are we getting every month? So we do have the May report. The June one will be to come. And then, of course, we'll have these numbers hopefully every month kind of as we go. But, yes, so those are definitely things we're looking at right now.
And then just a suggestion, people log in to watch the video stream council meetings. I think we ought to take those videos and while they're waiting for the meeting to start, play those videos. Just captive audience.
To watch them, yeah.
It's not a bad idea.
Have our own little
And-
Kind of
advertising
like that
commercial
and we
preview
could-
before
we
the
could
movie.
even-
Right.
We could
It's
even
like you
take
go to the
our-
movie theater, but you have to watch all this
You have
other
to watch
stuff
the
first.
previews.
Yeah.
That's it. It's a thought. It's a good thought.
Golf cart safety.
Y'all do a great job with that stuff.
Anything else?
I think just for council's edification, the other one of this category that I want to work into somehow, it's somewhat related to 5.1, but something to the effect of increased recruitment and retention strategies in the HR realm. I haven't completely fleshed that out yet, but that's just one, as I was reviewing this, particularly in our area, that's, I think, one we need to incorporate and try to fully more develop what that looks like on a project level as well. But I thought that's either whether we amend 5.1 or create a new one, but that's the other thought I had under this pillar.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo that because I think that's a great point because I probably said this every time we've done a compensation study is beware the compensation study because it's old data the day you get the report and stuff. And just I would suggest investing some time and effort into seeing what coping strategies are other municipalities using to deal with the current situation of trying to recruit, retain staff, because somebody's got to be coming up with an answer somehow or the other. That may be able to get some insights into some other things we could try.
Good on my end. Helpful, thank you.
We've covered all the pillars.
We have.
Just from council's perspective, is there anything, not that we want to do a thorough review of all the pillars, but is there anything that we missed or anything that you want to add?
Oh.
I tell you, from my position, observing and participating in what we did tonight, I thought they were good discussions. I thought people were open to providing comments and providing their views, and I think that's important for us. It's important for us to get our piece of information out and really to put it all together so that we can develop a comprehensive plan that meets all the requirements or meets all the desires of council. So thank you all for tonight. I appreciate your participation and speaking up. Amanda, anything else that we need to do for tonight?
Our devices.
Scott, anything else you need to add, or?
No, this is great. It's a long slog, but I appreciate the council's time and attention, and this will help us a lot.
And Tobin, anything else that, from your perspective, that we need to do? All right, then I have the time now is 9:15, and we are adjourned. Add 5, add 4.